Quick question. Which villain do you think would have won if not for the protagonist's ridiculous plot armor? Let me know your answer in the comments below. Anyway, on to the video. Our story begins with some lore about the world. For centuries, humans had stood at the pinnacle of all creation, until a strange new gene structure came and fucked shit up. The new genetic makeup was far superior to that of mere humans, giving rise to an entirely different species called Kimyos. The Kimyos were stronger, faster, better, and more resilient than humans in every conceivable way. And that was just the simplest complementary trait of their DNA. The more sophisticated aspects of their genes manifested as supernatural abilities termed talents. Although surreal, most talents were predominantly harmless. For example, the ability to manipulate simple elements and flex on the homies, or control your body's internal structure, thereby manipulating extensions of your body like bones. Some rare cases even involved altering the very cellular makeup of the body at will, enabling transformations into various non-human forms, like this pig bastard right here. Last, but certainly not least, in fact arguably the most significant trait, Kimyos could pull bitches. And I mean mad hoes, practically swimming in the huzz. Anyway, as with everything, there was an exception to the danger level of Kimyo talents. While most were generally harmless, some were truly heaven-defying. The elites among them held power strong enough to annihilate the entire world, possibly wiping out the human race. In the town of Port of Spain, Trinidad and Tobago, amidst a bustling crowd, we are introduced to the MC of our story, Che motherfucking Hart. Introduced as the contender of the night, Che was set to face off against the human Quill. Astutely named, you guessed it, Quill. Despite the underwhelming naming sense, Quill was actually a formidable warrior, boasting an impressive record of 15 wins and 4 losses in his fighting career. Che, on the other hand, had a measly 3 wins. But don't count him out just yet, because he'd been blessed by the Maiden of War. And all 3 of those wins were against Kimyos, despite him being human himself. At the gong of the bell, Quill didn't mince words. He directly activated his talent, Porcupine. It allowed him to stretch and harden his skin and muscles, forming sharp quills like a porcupine. Emboldened by his talent, he launched a relentless assault on Che, dishing out punches and forcing him onto the defensive from the get-go. Pressing the attack, he whipped a roundhouse kick at Che, which Che barely managed to block before tumbling backward. Feeling himself, Quill paused his offensive to taunt Che, telling him to stop cowering and face him directly. How long was he planning to turtle up like a bitch? Incredulous, Che shot him a funny look. Who was he calling a turtle? Wasn't he the one with literal spikes all over his body, preventing anyone from getting close? Who was the real bitch here? Nevertheless, the challenge had been issued, and there was no way Che would cower. He shot forward, arriving at Quill's flank in an instant. Ducking below a wild jab, he reared back for a nasty rib punch, but Quill was one step ahead, deploying his talent and spiking the shit out of Che. Forced to retreat, Che cursed the bastard. Who was he calling a cowering bitch again? Still, this was a superhuman fight. Complaining was pointless. Locking in, Che quickly deduced the weakness of the porcupine bastard. He couldn't maintain his quills for long, probably 30 to 60 seconds tops. Surprised he'd been figured out, Quill kept up his cocky bravado, taunting Che even more, telling him to come at him. Che said bet and zoomed forward, bobbing and weaving through Quill's defenses. Spotting an opening, he darted in with a quick punch, rocking Quill's shit before withdrawing just as the talent reactivated. Just like that, the tables turned, with Che dominating through careful, lightning-fast attacks. Spinning on his feet, Che lunged in for a devastating kick primed to end the fight in one move. But the smirk on Quill's lips made it obvious. This was exactly what he'd been waiting for. A trap. Sure enough, he activated his talent on his arms, waiting for Che to land the kick and screw himself royally. But contrary to his expectations, Che had seen through it. Withdrawing his attack, he landed gracefully, completing his feint before shooting forward to clock Quill in the gut. The unexpected move left Quill completely defenseless, and he was flung away like a rag doll. Not one to miss opportunities, Che closed in with a left jab. Quill countered by activating his talent on his face, preventing any attack there. But once again, it was only a feint. The real attack slammed into his gut, Suffering 2 consecutive losses and being made a fool of, Quill finally snapped. He grabbed Che's arm and decided to play dirty, activating his talent and spiking the shit out of Che's hand, making sure the Huz wouldn't get any loving tonight. But Che tanked the pain and smiled broadly. He had him. Since Quill had already used his talent on his stomach, his jaw was wide open for a counterattack. Before Quill could curse his blunder, Che rocked his shit again, this time sending him straight to sleep. With a sickening thud, the poor bastard was laid out cold. We switched scenes to the locker room, 1 hour after the fight. Although he managed to win, Che was still just a mortal fighting a superhuman, so it was inevitable his shit would be rocked a little. He stood by the sink, nursing his wounds, while the commentary of another match echoed in the background, this one bloodier than his own, a true Kimyo versus Kimyo fight. Flexing his six-pack abs and manly physique, no homo, Che barely had enough time to admire himself before trouble came knocking. A duo of sketchy-looking dudes who clearly came for the smoke. As expected, the trouble-seeking pair clicked their tongues in annoyance before stating their purpose. They wanted compensation. Apparently, they'd bet big on Quill winning, so Che's victory was unacceptable. They threatened him to cough up cash, or else they'd really fuck him up. And he better not get any wild ideas about playing hero. They knew he was tired from his fight against Quill. Bleeding malice, they advised him to comply or face violence. Che sighed and told them to close the door. Like the iconic scene from Kingsman, he was about to manners maketh man on their asses. The goons said bet and stepped forward, whipping out knives ready for the tango. Fast forward a few minutes later. We shift to the building's lobby. Behind the counter sat a receptionist who, for lack of a better word, was hot and bothered. Seriously simping for our boy Che. Like a damsel in heat, she flashed back to their earlier encounter, her cheeks flushing at the memory. Che had walked right up to her and called her by name. Demalia. That alone was enough to get the down-bad maiden soaked. Exploiting the opening, she shot her shot, telling Che he looked particularly charming tonight, especially with the new scars, which only made him hotter. Che nonchalantly thanked her, clearly uninterested, but Demalia wasn't one to give up easily. Feigning an aggrieved tone, she invited him to a celebration party afterward, accusing him of never making time for her on the side. Didn't he know she was a prime maiden, ripe and ready to be picked? Unbothered, Che gave her the same flat reply. He'd be busy at home and wouldn't make it. Seemingly getting the hint, Demalia sighed and retrieved Che's earnings for the night. But before handing it over, she tried one last time, telling Che to look for her if he ever got cold. In other words, if he wanted cheeks, he knew who to reach. Pocketing the cash, Che said, okay. If he ever hit a drought, he'd seek her out. Then, as if remembering something, he told Demalia to send someone to his locker room. Some unfortunate souls seemed to have slipped and fell in there. Fast forward again, now to Che's home. Like a true protagonist, he monologued. Pain, although undesirable, lets us know we're alive. But why endure such pain? Why torture his body fighting superhumans while being just a mortal? He didn't say, but there was a greater motive behind it, one he hoped wasn't in vain. The following morning, a car was parked outside Che's house. By the car stood 2 figures, constantly roasting him. The woman said Che was probably inside disappointing a lady, dishing out weak strokes, which explained his lateness. The man countered that she was being too generous. No woman would tolerate Che long enough to even offer the cheeks. Exiting the house, Che overheard their chatter. His lips twitched. Did these fools really have nothing better to talk about? Ignoring them, he turned to Tevin, already knowing what was coming. As expected, Tevin called him out. He'd known Che for 15 years, and in the 7 years Che had lived in that apartment, no one had ever been inside. What was he hiding? Drugs or something? Che brushed off the accusations, got in the car, and told them to drive. Destination: the gym. Arriving at Red Ember Gym, Che looked at the building with a warm smile. This was his dojo, his home. Meanwhile, inside, an intense spar was underway. A Kimyo whipped a heavy kick toward an old man. This old man was Leo Thomas, a war hero of the Kimyo versus Human War, and the owner of the dojo. Che described him as a kind but strict man, who treated them like his own sons, and gave rogues from poor backgrounds like them a way out. As for what exactly happened in the human versus Kimyo War, and what atrocities took place, that's a story for another time. Back to the spar. The Kimyo's kick was effortlessly dodged as Leo casually stepped aside. Persistent, the Kimyo readjusted and launched an unceasing barrage. Unfazed, Leo blocked and parried every strike before forcing him to retreat. Not relenting, the Kimyo blitzed to Leo's blind spot, aiming to catch him off guard. But as expected of an old man in a world where men die young, Leo wasn't to be underestimated. He intercepted the Kimyo, blocking a super punch with a single arm. Then, as if possessed by the ghost of Kung Fu, he blitzed the shit out of him, landing a flurry of punches before finishing with a savage palm strike that sent the Kimyo flying. But Leo wasn't done. Just before the Kimyo could soar off into the distance, Leo grabbed him and yanked him back into the fray. Using a judo technique, he flipped the poor bastard, sending him airborne like a hawk, only to yank him back again. Tossed, turned, and primed for a devastating finisher. The Kimyo could only watch in despair. Without suspense, Leo clocked his shit with a sidekick, laying him out flat. The force hurled him out of the arena, close enough for Che to witness his pitiful fate. Chuckling mockingly, Tevin told Che he was cooked. Once the master saw his broken face, his fate would be worse than that poor bastard. Clapping back, Che told him not to worry. He didn't need sympathy from a man-child still being chauffeured around by his girl. Fuming, Tevin took the loss in silence. Back in the ring, Leo's harsh but dedicated coaching continued. As the old man polished the young Kimyo's ass, Che and Tevin regrouped with the boys. They pitied Azam, who was getting his shit rocked by Leo. Then one of them suddenly remembered and called out to Che, telling him to get ready. The master had been looking for him. With those foreboding words, the spar ended, and Leo turned his gaze on Che, summoning him to the stage. Sweating profusely, Che stuttered a whimper before reluctantly dragging himself forward. Once there, he immediately folded under Leo's stern gaze. Like a disappointed father, Leo scolded him for his carelessness. What would happen if he faced a powerful Kimyo and ended up dead? Would he be happy then? Enraged, Leo slapped Che, venting some anger. Head buzzing and vision blurred, Che scampered away, fearing another beating. Leo sighed in disappointment, about to start the day's lesson. But before he could, a loud clap rang out, drawing everyone's attention. Following the clap came a sinister voice, asking why Leo seemed so tense. Was his age finally catching up to him? Enter the first villain of the story, Rokash Rampersad, a narcissistic bastard who'd made a name for himself in Trinidad. Recently ranked among the top 150 strongest Kimyos, his ego inflated to unbearable levels, earning him the hatred of nearly everyone. Though strong, he was now the most despised man in the country. Cho didn't know any of these guys, so he asked his master directly, "Who was this cocky bastard?" Tevin chimed in, seeking the same clarification. He then questioned the trio. Hadn't they seen the sign prohibiting visits during training hours? Or were they illiterate? The boys lined up, showing their unified stance. Rokash, this sinister bastard, was not welcome there. Feeling the hostility, Rokash clicked his tongue in annoyance. How was Leo raising trash like this? Was this really how they greeted their master's former student? Shocked, the disciples looked at Leo incredulously. Was it true? Rokash was once part of them? But then, remembering their master's unyielding rejection of Rokash, they shelved their doubts and told the trio to leave. Rokash and his people clapped back, saying they weren't going anywhere. If they were that adamant about chasing them away, then they could settle it with a good-spirited, hot-blooded spar. Nothing beats the clapping of fresh cheeks in the morning after all. Fed up, Leo released his aura, the overwhelming flame power concealed within. His body burst into golden flames, scorching the very air around him. Furious, he told Rokash to leave. This was his last chance. He wouldn't give him another. Though humiliated, Rokash was truly humbled by the overwhelming power radiating from Leo. He had no choice but to swallow his grievance and turn to leave. But before he did, as typical of a budget villain, he left a final threat behind. Leo shouldn't think he was hot fire, literally. The world had changed, and several formidable people had emerged. He was no longer the peak of Kimyo power, nor did he have a clue of what true strength looked like. But he shouldn't worry, because Rokash would enlighten him soon enough. Too bad that knowledge might come at the cost of his worthless life, and sooner than he thought. Having said so, Rokash swaggered calmly out of the dojo. Time swiftly passed, and soon dusk arrived. While cleaning the gym, Che's thoughts kept flicking back to the earlier altercation. Unable to suppress his curiosity any longer, he asked Leo directly, what was up with that bastard? And what was all that talk about him being a former student? Leo replied that Rokash was indeed a former student, but his arrogance and vile nature had caused a falling out. Still, one thing remained true. Rokash was one of the strongest disciples he had ever taught. Drunk on his power and constantly craving validation, Rokash often challenged other disciples, beating them down just to prove his strength. He relished standing above others, grinning and jesting, taking his victories further and further, until he finally crossed a line he shouldn't have. One day, behind Leo's back, he organized a spar against a fellow disciple, Jacob. Things got out of control, and Rokash ended up killing him. The whole thing blew up, and the police were called to investigate. But with limited evidence, it was ruled an unintentional homicide, the result of carelessness during the fight. Rokash left the dojo after that, and hadn't returned, until now. Incredulous, Che was shocked that Rokash had managed to get away with murder just like that. Clicking his tongue, he told his master not to worry. If Rokash ever showed his stupid face there again, he and the boys would kick his ass. Leo chuckled and threw some teasing jabs at him. Touched, he told Che to head out. He must have his own business to handle. Fast forward to later that day at the clinic. Coming in for a checkup, Che patiently waited for the doctor's arrival. Upon entering, the two, clearly fond of each other, exchanged some good-natured banter. The doctor reported that his daughter was pregnant again, expecting her 6th child. Shocked, Che looked at him incredulously. That daughter of his was truly a freak, obsessed with the meat. But aside from that, did he have what Che needed? The doctor nodded and listed off what sounded like an entire pharmacy's worth of prescriptions. He'd even added a new drug to the mix, guaranteed to help with Che's internal bleeding. Then, remembering his last visit, he asked about Che's eye. Any improvements? Che replied that he hadn't felt any. His visibility was still at 60%. At this, the doctor dropped his carefree attitude and advised him seriously. He should really consider abandoning his fighting career. Sure, his body was stronger than most, likely thanks to Leo's training, but he was still just a mortal. Fighting Kimyos had pushed his body to the limit, and it wasn't an exaggeration to say he was lucky to be alive. His body was a complete mess. Even spending an entire evening listing defects wouldn't cover it all. He should seriously consider retiring before he dropped dead one day. Surely the money from the fight club couldn't be worth that much, right? Smiling sadly, Che replied that he had no choice. Although he appreciated the doctor's concern, this was something he had to do, especially since the money was for a good cause. He thanked the doctor again, then put on a big, cheerful smile. He was a tough boy, he'd be all right. The doctor sighed and wisely let the matter go. It wasn't his place to meddle anymore. Bidding farewell, he wished Che the best and encouraged him to seek him out should he ever need help. Che said bet, and immediately thought of his succubus daughter. Maybe he should aspire to be her 7th baby daddy. Jokes aside, he quickly bid the doctor goodbye and left the clinic. Back at the dojo, a foreboding pressure lingered in the air. As if waiting for someone, Leo calmly flicked through his Bible. Soon, to his disappointment, the doorknob turned, and someone walked in. That someone was Rokash, veiled in shadows, releasing an overwhelming killing intent. The night promised to be long and messy. Meanwhile, on Che's side, the oblivious MC was on the phone with Tevin, discussing Rokash's threat to their master. Tevin told him not to worry. Although a psycho, he doubted Rokash was heartless enough to actually harm the man who had made him. Che agreed, but still decided to check on Leo the next morning. It was always best to be careful. Tevin supported the idea but quickly excused himself, fearing the wrath of his girl for being on the phone too long. Besides, the succubus was giving him the look, so he knew shit was about to go down. All aboard to Pound Town. Meanwhile, back at the Red Ember Gym, things had taken an unfortunate turn. The whole building was up in flames, the result of the clash between Leo and Rokash. Amidst a sea of fire, Leo stood tall, glaring down at the defeated Rokash. Unfortunately, things weren't as simple as they seemed. Despite being the clear winner, Leo was wounded, a fatal gunshot to the gut. He glared at the cause of his injury, a bastard wielding a gun on the side. Enraged, Rokash scolded his nephew. Why had he intervened? Hadn't he made it clear Leo was his to kill? But before his nephew could justify himself, Leo suddenly appeared before him, bathed in flames, having used the Phoenix Spear technique to accelerate. He punched the nephew in the gut, sending him crashing into the wall. Once done, he turned his attention back to Rokash, scolding him for his lack of honor. Was this how he'd raised his nephew? To sneak attack people during a duel? Enraged, Rokash finally let out the emotions buried in his heart. He accused Leo of overlooking him, always refusing to acknowledge his strength despite all his efforts to make their dojo the best. As for Jacob, that weakling shouldn't have accepted his challenge if he knew he was too weak. Furious, Leo cut him off, telling him to shut his mouth. He wasn't worthy of speaking Jacob's name ever again. Sighing, Leo confessed that the gunshot wound was fatal. He wouldn't make it through the night. But before he died, he had to correct his past mistakes, namely Rokash and his twisted, sinister ways. Burning in divine flames, he began Rokash's rehabilitation. First lesson: a parent's tough love. Rokash roared in defiance and told him to come at him. Leo didn't hesitate and shot forward, arriving before Rokash with a whipping knee kick. Rokash barely had enough time to block before the unexpected heavy blow knocked the wind out of him. Leo didn't let up and continued the combo with a powerful left jab before effortlessly dodging Rokash's counterattack. He inched closer, closing the gap before striking with a brutal 1-inch punch. The blow sent Rokash reeling, and he wailed like a bitch as he coughed up a mouthful of fresh blood. Not satisfied, Leo advanced the attack. He grabbed Rokash by the collar and yeeted him into the air like a rag doll. Pressing the attack, he channeled his flames to his feet, shooting off like a rocket launched into deep space. Within a second, he'd closed in on Rokash, clipping him on the side as he shot by. Then, as if guided by the god of Kung Fu, he somersaulted in the air, changed trajectory, and shot back at Rokash with unbridled fury. Channeling his don't look back no jutsu, he spawned behind the petrified Rokash and blasted him with a devastating firepalm strike. Not relenting, he pushed the assault further, activating his secret technique, Ilios Descending Meteor. Endless plumes of fire bellowed out as Leo's body burst forward with unbelievable momentum. An all-annihilating heat radiated from him, consuming the very air around him, rocketing him toward Rokash in an instant. Merciless, he unleashed all that momentum, stomping Rokash on the chest and burying that treacherous bastard into the ground, layered with flames, heat, and wrath. With that done, Leo finally paused his severe ass-whooping and assessed his condition. Things weren't looking good. Although he was overwhelmingly strong, so strong that whooping a top 150 Kimyo like Rokash was child's play. Everything eventually succumbed to time. He was just too old to survive a fatal wound like the one he had. Even as he spoke, he could already feel the last embers of his life slipping away. Enraged, he shifted his fury to Rokash, his voice tinged with loathing and regret. He commended him for his shamelessness, daring to attack only after his strength had deteriorated with age. But he shouldn't smile just yet, because Leo would make sure he paid dearly for his actions. With those words, he blitzed out of existence, only to reappear before Rokash, his fingers inches from the bastard's eye. Like a grim reaper signaling the death knell, he whispered gravely into Rokash's ear. This would be his punishment, a maiming to remind him of his failure for the rest of his life. Then without hesitation, he dug into Rokash's eye socket, plucking out an eyeball with gore spilling after. Torturous wailing followed as Rokash rolled on the ground, lamenting the agonizing loss of his eye. Leo, however, smiled contentedly, relishing the screams while still holding on to the plucked eye. It was only after his nephew came to him that Rokash snapped out of his frenzy and sobered up. The building was on fire. They couldn't stay there any longer. Turning to the smiling Leo, Rokash barked all the venom in his heart. Old and overpowered. Who did he think he was? Netero? He better stop with that smiling in the face of death bullshit. In any case, the victor is king, and this would be Leo's grave. Who would know he laminated Rokash's cheeks today? No one. That truth would follow him into his blazing grave. Then, not wasting any more time with the dying man, Rokash turned and scurried away. Left alone in the burning dojo, Leo Thomas finally took his last breath. In his moment of passing, he had but one regret. CHADY. Fast forward a few days later, beneath a wailing sky, Leo's send-off was underway. Friends and family gathered, all reunited to bid their final goodbyes to the legendary hero. Kind words were spoken, but to the disciples burning with vengeance, it was all nonsense. They glanced at each other, already knowing what came next. One of them, a sword eyebrow-looking motherfucker, was the first to speak, asking what the hell they were doing. They already knew Rokash was the culprit, so why the hell were they still sitting on their asses? A second one, who low-key looked like a shady pastor, chimed in, announcing that Rokash would be holding a tournament in a month. The winner of the tournament would get the opportunity to fight him one-on-one, his sick way of celebrating his entry into the top 150 Kimyos while rewarding the victor. If they wanted a clean shot at him, the tournament was their best bet. The group collectively turned to CHADY, asking him to represent them. Only 2 from each dojo could register for the tournament, and they wanted CHADY to be one of them. Amused, CHADY asked what the hell they were smoking. He was the only one in the group without powers. How did it make sense for him to register? Tevin stepped in, glazing him a little bit. He told CHADY he was blessed in combat, a fact even their late master had acknowledged. Although no one knew why the goddess of war favored him so much, handing out cheeks of talent whenever he asked, the fact remained that he was the most gifted of them all. If he represented them, their chances of winning would surely rise. Besides, he wouldn't be alone. Tevin would fight alongside him, and their master's vengeance would be just around the corner. CHADY looked up at them and agreed without hesitation. They already had the who, when, and where. So what the hell were they waiting for? Cheeks needed to be clapped. Meanwhile, on Rokash's side, the treacherous bastard was swimming in PTSD. Memories of his ass-whooping kept flashing through his mind, making his grip on the armchair involuntarily tighten. Though enraged and embarrassed, he couldn't do anything about it. He'd lost miserably to the geezer Leo Thomas. Consoling himself, he decided to wait for the tournament. Maybe by then the sickening defeat in his heart would have disappeared. Fast forward 4 months later, at the Rokash Combat Stadium, the venue for the fight. The whole group had assembled, including Tevin's girl who, from this angle, looked hella thick. What a lucky bastard. Speaking first, the sketchy pastor informed CHADY and Tevin that he'd already booked a changing room for them. All they had to do was register and wait. But he advised caution. The first day was stacked with heavy hitters, the tournament's way of building hype. Picking up on this, Tevin's girl glared daggers at him. She warned him to be careful, or else she'd kill him herself. As for the consequences of getting hurt, he already knew. No sucky for an entire month. The gang burst into laughter at Tevin's predicament. They wanted to roast the simp, but an announcement from the TV caught their attention. The news feature was about their mortal enemy, Rokash Rampersad. Unbridled killing intent filled the room as the gang collectively turned to the screen. Their faces twisted with murderous rage, seconds away from crashing out. But as expected, the TV was an inanimate object, uncaring of their feelings, so the feature rolled on. It introduced Rokash Rampersad, Trinidad and Tobago's first Kimyo to be ranked in the top 150 strongest fighters. Not only was he a so-called prodigy, he was also a self-made millionaire with businesses spanning multiple industries: real estate, fashion, hotels, and more. Though already a 61-year-old geezer, he was still the darling of many women, having pulled and slayed countless maidens in his time. But Rokash wasn't just about looks. He was also a formidable fighter, with an impressive record of 46 wins and only 3 losses in his professional career. It was no wonder the news called him a prodigy, minus the questionable trouble with the police over Jacob's death. The feature wrapped up by shading light on what they called a challenging time for Rokash, the death of his former master and mentor, Leo Thomas. They didn't go into detail, but twisted the story to portray Rokash as the loyal disciple mourning his master's death and out for revenge. This enraged the gang, who collectively cursed him for his shamelessness. But now wasn't the time for sentiment. The tournament was about to begin. Pulling up his hoodie, CHADY instructed the boys to move out. He was done listening to that paid propaganda bullshit. The boys agreed and followed him into the changing room. Meanwhile, The feature continued, spinning excuses for Rokash's recent scars and injuries. They claimed it was a combat scar, earned in a righteous duel of honor. They even glazed him further, saying the scars made him look more intriguingly intimidating than before. Shifting scenes, we're taken to the gang's changing room, where strategies were being laid out. Bootleg Mike Tyson, the team's information mule, explained the tournament's specifics. Fights would be brutal contests, meaning participants were encouraged to kill each other to win instantly. Though shocked, Tevin decided to proceed, but begged the boys to keep the truth from his girl. Who knew what crazy shit she'd pull if she found out? Actually, he did know. No sucky for an entire year. That is, if she didn't kill him first. Anyway, it was too late to turn back now. Time to get ready. Hearing his name, Tevin confidently walked onto the arena. In the stands, his thicker-than-gravy girlfriend cheered for him. Opposite him stood his opponent, who low-key thought he was the MC, Sunraz the Untouched. And no, untouched didn't mean he was a tragic virgin, a maidenless loser. It meant he was a speedster Kimyo with unparalleled speed, and had never once been injured in his career. Amused, Tevin commented on the matchup. A speedster Kimyo versus a tank, these organizers sure knew how to pick. But if they thought this was enough to beat him, they'd be gravely disappointed. He didn't care whether Sunraz was the fastest Kimyo, untouched by maidens. He was the toughest Kimyo, and the bastard would never get past his defense. Before he could finish his glazing, Sunraz spawned behind him, shocking the shit out of him. Tevin barely had time to react before he was whipped to the floor. Enraged, he looked up to see Sunraz glaring at him with undisguised contempt. He told Tevin he was no match, that countless others had failed to lay a finger on him, and Tevin would be no exception. Tevin fumed and punched forward, only to be dodged and counterattacked, kicked square in the gut. He barely regained his senses when a second Sunraz appeared behind him, followed by a third, trapping him dangerously between them. Shady Pastor, the group's strategist, explained what was happening. Sunraz's talent was called Image Fusion Threshold. In short, he moved so fast his afterimages had time to materialize, creating duplicates of himself. Could that information help Tevin? Hell no. The homie was already getting his shit rocked. Chase shouted for him to get his guard up, but Tevin shouted back that he was trying. The untouched bastard was just too damn fast. All he could do was grit his teeth and take the beating. As the punches and kicks rained down, fury built in Tevin's heart. His girl was in the stands, watching him get clowned. How could he allow that? Locking in, he began his Kimyo transformation. With a deafening roar, he unleashed his energy, blasting Sunraz back. Under the shocked gaze of his opponent, he revealed his true form, Rhino Hide, a talent that let him create a protective shell over his body, massively boosting both defense and offense. Seeing this, Sunraz's reaction was a little peculiar. The dude literally said, "And I shit you not, Nani?" I was like, who the fuck does this guy think he is? An anime protagonist or some shit? In any case, his questionable response didn't stop him from acting accordingly, narrowly dodging Tevin's mighty punch. The force from that single punch kicked up dust storms, showing just how mighty the transformed simp was, and delighting Sunraz for his astute decision to dodge. Otherwise, his shit would have been baked. But even then, things weren't as hopeless as he'd imagined. Dodging another jab, he quickly activated his talent, zooming away from Tevin and buying himself enough breathing room to think. Through the MC's insistent chatter, he finally gleaned the details of Tevin's talent, and he could sum it up in one word: brute. The dude was basically a walking war machine, but instead of despairing, Sunraz became elated. Though tanky, Tevin was now even more vulnerable to his speed than before, his agility greatly reduced because of the thick armor. Sunraz immediately stopped hesitating and pressed the attack, running circles around his helpless foe. Noticing this, Tevin realized his blunder. It seemed his transformation had been too hasty. He hadn't thought things through, but he was already in it, so he might as well deal with it and worry about the consequences later. With that in mind, he tanked up, focusing entirely on his defense. He wholeheartedly trusted his talent and believed Sunraz would never get past his hide. Unfortunately, reality was often disappointing. Sunraz pierced through that shit like butter, ruthlessly kneeing him in the chin. Tevin barely had time to regain his senses before a second attack landed. Seeing this, Che shouted at him to get his shit together. Why was he just taking hits? Had he forgotten the master's teachings? Find the opponent's weakness, goddammit. According to Leo, talents were exactly as their name suggested, talents. They could either be nurtured or neglected, but one thing always remained the same. Every talent had a weakness. In some cases, the talent's greatest strength, when looked at from another angle, became its greatest weakness. He called that the blind spot of talents. Reflecting on this teaching, Tevin continued his desperate struggle, clumsily fending off Sunraz's barrage while trying to find his weakness. He endured several more rounds of ass-whooping before a feasible solution finally emerged: destroy the ground. Since this speedster bastard required a firm footing to use his talent, what would happen if Tevin destroyed the ground? There was only one way to find out. The next time Sunraz charged at him, his eyes crimson with killing intent, Tevin confidently shouted at him to bring it on. He had a whole can of whoop-ass to serve. Then, without hesitation, he raised his leg and stomped hard on the floor, completely destroying the arena ground. Caught off guard by the unexpected attack, Sunraz was momentarily dazed, unable to react to the bizarre change. It was only when he saw Tevin rear his hand back that he knew he was beyond cooked. Smirking, Tevin told the trapped Sunraz he shouldn't have fucked with him. Because of the damage he'd dealt, Tevin's girl would punish him by withholding sloppy toppy for an entire month, and such grievances had to be avenged. Thus, as he reared his hand back for a finisher, the terror on Sunraz's face made him even more delighted. With undisguised fury and resentment, he punched the absolute shit out of Sunraz, sending the speedster flying like a rag doll. The poor fellow was almost launched into space, were it not for the protective shield surrounding the arena. It's safe to say the sudden change caught everyone off guard. The entire audience took a second to digest it. Then, as if by prior arrangement, deafening cheers thundered from the stands, all chanting Tevin's name. The once mighty speedster was quickly forgotten, his battered body carried away by the medical team. With the match won, Tevin powered down and regrouped with the squad. His girl was also there, and I gotta say, this maiden was turning out more cake than I thought. Just look at that squishy squeeze. Damn. Enjoying the soft melons, Tevin regained his senses long enough to ask about Che. Where the hell was that bastard? Shady Preacher replied that Che was getting ready, preparing himself for his fight. However, there was an unsettling aura about him that he found quite troublesome. Their plan for participating in the tournament was to expose Rokash, but he doubted Che would maintain his rationality if he encountered the bastard. It was best they prepared for any unexpected events. Meanwhile, in the arena, the next matchup was already being announced. In one corner was the homie Che, a certified badass and formidable fighter despite his mortal limitations. In the other was the freak, mutant, and human hunter Nanaku. The dude was a bona fide psychopath, only participating in BC battles to kill and torment his opponents. Sensing the overwhelming malice, Che instinctively frowned. This bastard. Just how many people had he killed for his aura to be that bloody? Nanaku, however, ignored his disgusted face and expressed his frustration. This was meant to be his big debut, his great name resounding all over Trinidad and Tobago. How dare they match him up with a mere mortal? Were they fucking with him? Well, it didn't matter. He'd just kill Che and move on to bigger prey. As for Che, this talentless loser, he was already a dead man. Why would he bother with an appetizer cheek meant to be clapped while he waited for better prey? He was already being generous by granting him the opportunity of dying by his hands. Che listened to the diss and warned sternly that Nanaku should get the hell out of his way. He had family business to handle. Nanaku replied with a mocking chuckle. If he wanted him out of the way, then he had to come and do it himself. Thus the duo squared off, beginning the bout as soon as the gong rang. Nanaku opened with a claw strike, but Che easily parried that shit and countered with a gut punch. Dodging, Nanaku sidestepped and grabbed Che's hand, opening him up for a counterattack. But Che reacted quickly, freeing himself and whipping a roundhouse kick toward Nanaku's face. Forced to block, the fish bastard parried the attack before continuing his offensive. Meanwhile, by the sidelines, some interested parties were paying close attention to the fight. One of them was Rokash, who recognized Che as Leo's disciple. The others were the squad, loudly cheering for their boy and hoping Che would win. Taking advantage of the moment, Sword Eyebrow Dude asked Nanaku's team what talent he had. Was he a shark or something? Nanaku's boy, smirking coldly, told him to wait and see. His question would be answered soon enough. Sure enough, things were heating up in the arena. After exchanging multiple moves, the duo upped the ante with Nanaku whipping a kick toward Che. The latter barely dodged by leaning back, then capitalized on the opening and rushed in for an elbow strike, forcing Nanaku into defending. The two exchanged several more intense blows before meeting halfway with palm strikes. Leaning closer, Nanaku taunted Che. How did it feel to smell his own death? Had he ever thought he'd die so pathetically? Well, he shouldn't be sad. He wasn't the only one. Several others had died by his hands, and Che would just be another. But before he croaked, shouldn't he show a more terrified face? How could he relish his death otherwise? Che clicked his tongue in annoyance and tuned out the psycho. His only reply to Nanaku's creepy words was a vicious stomp on the chest, sending the bastard flying. Regaining his composure, Nanaku shrugged off the blow and tore off his shirt. This was exactly what he loved most, a prey that fought for its survival. Well then, should they get serious? It was about time he grilled the marinated cheeks. Ignoring the sussy comments, Che issued his last warning. Nanaku should really get the hell out of his way. He had a mission to accomplish. Still confident, Nanaku repeated his previous answer. If Che wanted him gone, he knew what to do. Che didn't hesitate. He punched forward, clocking Nanaku in the face. However, contrary to the dazed reaction he expected, the shark bastard burst out laughing. Was that all he had? Feeling an ominous premonition, Che immediately ducked, narrowly avoiding a lethal claw to the neck. If he'd been a second slower, the attack would have ripped out his throat. Nevertheless, he quickly calmed himself and countered with a backhand elbow strike, rocking Nanaku a little. Fed up with the games, Nanaku gave Che the Wayne Brady special, choking a bitch. He lifted him into the air, smirking evilly at the trapped prey. Then, without hesitation, he clawed into Che's chest, slashing out a gash of flesh. Terrified, the gang turned pale at the sight. Who knew things would change so drastically? Nanaku's boys, however, laughed mockingly. This was just the beginning. Things were about to get more interesting. Back in the arena, Che distanced himself to recover. Nanaku didn't pursue him, and instead shifted his attention to the sputtered blood. Slurping it up, he taunted Che, saying his blood tasted delicious. Wouldn't it be better if he bled more for him? Che ignored him and checked his wound. It wasn't looking good. The shark bastard had ripped through his armor and shredded his flesh. It would be a miracle if he could exert even 50% of his power. Nevertheless, the mission had to continue. He changed his strategy, opting to run down the clock. With that in mind, he attacked passively, throwing punches only when cornered. Of course, Nanaku picked up on this and advanced mercilessly, palming Che in the face. He chained the attack with a flying sidekick, yeeting Che halfway across the arena. Bloody and battered, Che shakily rose to his feet. He expected a finisher attack, but Nanaku's advance never came. Instead, the psycho went for the sputtered blood, slurping it up with delight. Delirious, Nanaku quivered in ecstasy, thoroughly enjoying the taste. His throat continuously gulped as he lost himself in the feeling. Finally, just as I was about to question what the hell was going on and chant, "Why are you gay at this freaky bastard?" he regained his senses and faced Che. With a psychotic laugh, he charged forward, yelling that he couldn't decide what to do anymore. Should he pin Che's head on a spike or store his heart in a jar? He couldn't decide, and it was driving him crazy. Taken aback by the psychotic behavior, Che hit him with the "don't get close no jutsu." He distanced himself from the lunatic, preparing for the next stage of the fated fight. Nanaku, on the other hand, pressed his advantage, clipping Che on the cheeks, thigh, and arms. He constantly advanced the attack, leaving Che no room to breathe. Finally, when he'd drawn enough blood, he hit Che with some wordplay, some budget Shakespeare-level poetry. The more you bleed, the less you breathe. I get what he means by that, but damn, isn't whooping his ass enough? Why does he have to recite poetry while doing it? What disrespect. The gang, witnessing Che's utter destruction in the arena, shouted for him to lock in. Did he forget the master's teachings? He should find the blind spot now, goddammit. Nanaku's boys, however, laughed at their futile and pitiful resistance. The hunting ground had already been set, and there was nothing they could do about it. Hearing those ominous words, Louise, the sword eyebrow dude, wondered what the hell they were talking about. What hunting ground? Exactly what were these bastards planning now? The thugs didn't keep him guessing for long and explained it clearly. It was already too late to change anything anyway, so what harm would telling him do? They revealed that once Nanaku draws first blood, the fight is essentially won. That's because upon drawing blood, he enters a hunting state where the opponent's blood fuels his instincts, leading to a transformation. The more you bleed, the faster the transformation, and the stronger he becomes. True to this, Nanaku's aura visibly changed, pressing down on everyone. The bloody, frenzied energy terrified Che, who was trapped with him in the arena. Realizing the unfavorable turn of events, Shady Pastor proposed stopping the fight. Their revenge wasn't as important as saving Che's life. However, Nanaku's boys told him to save his breath. Like they'd said before, it was too late to stop it now. Their boy was as good as dead. With those words, one of them gestured toward the arena, telling the squad to behold Nanaku's new form, and, by extension, the destruction of their beloved friend. Following the gesture, the group flicked their gazes over, only for their faces to freeze a second later, their skin turning ghostly pale. Nanaku had transformed into a gigantic, shredded beast of calamity, towering over Che. Its roar, or whatever the fuck sharks did to exert dominance, thundered in the arena, grating in the ears of all who heard it. Without a doubt, things had taken a disastrous turn. Watching from the sidelines, Rokash chuckled at Che's plight. What would he do now? Continue fighting and die a dog's death? Or surrender and cower away like a bitch? He was looking forward to seeing his choice. Meanwhile, Shady Pastor took one look at the transformed Nanaku, and his face changed drastically. At first, he'd thought the transformation was the worst of it, but it turned out that was just the beginning of their nightmare. The state Nanaku was in wasn't a mere transformation. The bastard was a state talent user, meaning so long as the conditions were met, he could continually maintain a buffed state. In Nanaku's case, the condition was blood. When in the presence of blood, either from his enemies or just blood lying around, he could enter a transformation that significantly increased his strength. So long as that remained the case, he could continuously maintain his overpowered state, leaving Che in a perilous situation. The fight had to be stopped, and it had to be stopped now. The gang agreed, but would they make it in time? Nanaku was already on the move, after all. Over at the battlefield, Nanaku cackled evilly as he lunged at Che. His sheer momentum sent shivers down Che's back, forcing him to dodge pathetically to the side, narrowly avoiding a stomp to the death. Regaining his footing, he pressed closer, unleashing a three-piece combo on Nanaku. However, the transformed behemoth just shrugged it off, grinning widely at Che's pitiful resistance. He counterattacked, punching Che in the face, then following up with a knee to the gut. Luckily, Che was incredibly nimble, so he blocked the attack and circled behind Nanaku, using a foot technique that left zero openings for exploitation. Positioned behind his foe, Che didn't hesitate to lock him in a bear hug before suplexing the shit out of his fishy ass. The attack left Nanaku reeling, further cracking a good portion of the arena. Unfortunately, not even that could stop the crazed hunter. He quickly shook off his dizziness before laying his hands on Che. Where the hell did he think he was going? The fun was just beginning. Saying so, he yeeted Che into the air and, in front of everyone, planted his face into the ground. The sickening squelch of breaking bones was enough to silence everyone. Well, everyone except Taven's thick girl, who took that chance to cop a feel, running her caramel-like hands over his abs and whispering things about Black Mamba and a quickie. What a heartless yet extremely thick woman. Anyway, jokes aside, Che was really going through it. His face was disfigured, several teeth missing, and his eyes were puffed and bloody, shedding tears of crimson. He was, by all means, a broken doll barely clinging to life. Regardless, Nanaku didn't feel like this was enough. He cocked his hand back for a follow-up attack, mocking Che with some dis no jutsu. He flamed him for overestimating himself, daring to face him. Hopefully his pitiful defeat would be a lesson for all those arrogant humans who believed they could stand against a Kimyo. Let his blood and death be their final warning. From then on, he vowed to kill and torture every arrogant human who dared enter a Kimyo tournament. Then, as if toying with his prey, he punched Che again, sending the poor bastard flying into the distance. Walking up to him, he recited some Shakespeare, or maybe some Fang Yuan level poetry, before embarking on his murderous tirade. "This will be the end of you," he said. "But don't worry. I'm a gentle, compassionate person and a lover. I'll make sure to escort you to the afterlife painlessly and swiftly." Hearing this, Tevin snapped. Fuck that. First he beat his ass, then recited poetry, and now he was hinting at clapping his ass? Like hell he'd let that happen. He shouted at the referee to stop the fight. Their boy was about to get violated in there. Shady Pastor joined in, yelling for the fight to stop and demanding that the gate be opened immediately. Unfortunately, things were moving way too fast for their pleas to matter. Nanaku was already on the prowl, claws stretched out for a decapitating strike. Witnessing this, Rokash shook his head in disappointment. To think he'd once been worried about this bug. He'd feared a connection with the legendary S-Heart, but it turned out he was nothing but a weakling. A disappointment cursed to carry only the name. Not worth worrying about. Meanwhile, back in the arena, Nanaku lunged forward, his sharp, shark-like fangs aiming for Che's face. The shadow of death loomed over him, and Che couldn't help but pale in terror. Was this how he would die? Where he would die? Bitten to death by a bloodthirsty shark? Nah, fuck all that. He wasn't going out like that. His sheer unwillingness became palpable, and he began hallucinating a figure walking up to him. Wait, was it really an illusion? It seemed too real. Just as Che was wondering if he was going mad, the figure before him suddenly opened his eyes. His burning irises flared as he roared at Che to wake up. He wouldn't be dying today. Outside in the real world, the arena suddenly burst into flames, illuminating the entire ground, crowd, and all. It became so blinding that those watching couldn't help but cover their eyes in horror, fearing they'd go blind. What the hell was this? What kind of sorcery was happening? Before they could piece anything together, more bad news hit. The barrier surrounding the arena was creaking, poised to shatter at any moment. The terrified audience could only imagine their grim fate if that happened. Helpless, they screamed for help, begging the strong Kimyos to save them. The gang heard this and said, "Say less." If they were looking for powerful Kimyos to help, they were their men. They quickly sprang into action, dispersing to save the crowd. Louise was first in the fray. He lunged forward, activating his Kimyo talent in the process. Dark, ash-like smoke gushed from his back, setting up a barrier to shield the audience. This was his Kimyo talent. Chichioya no Hai, I Papi, a range control ability. Unfortunately, despite how formidable the talent was, it wasn't enough to block the raging inferno. Bursts of flames broke through, targeting an innocent maiden with shiny twin peaks. Just as it seemed over for the angelic lady with the devilish body, a streak of green lightning flashed by, whisking her into its arms. The lightning was the manifestation of Shady Pastor Azam Ali's talent, haste. On the opposite side, Tevin was also doing his best to save civilians. His Kimyo talent was active, and he relied on his superior defense to tank the flames. However, regardless of what they were doing or who they were saving, they all had the same thought cross their minds. Wasn't this flame oddly similar to their masters? Just what the hell was going on? Meanwhile, in the arena, the once arrogant Nanaku wasn't acting so cocky anymore. His face had gone ghostly pale as he struggled for his life. Using debris as cover, he cautiously peeked to see what was going on. Then, as if realizing the truth, roared in rage. Didn't Che claim he was a regular human with no Kimyo talent? Then what the hell was this crap? Had he been deceived? Completely unforgivable. He would tear Che limb from limb for this mockery. He wanted to curse some more, but the sight before him left him stunned. The flames had died down, and Che's physique was finally visible. He looked divine, like a flame deity reincarnated into mortal flesh. Not to mention, he was packing some serious heat, literally, judging by the flames censoring the delicates. Confused by his transformation, Che took in his new form. His eyes darted across his body as he wondered why he didn't feel pain. His skin was melting, and he was on fire after all. The squad was equally stunned, unable to take their eyes off him. Was this a coincidence, or had their master done something? Che, on the other hand, marveled at his new body, feeling completely reborn. For some reason, he felt unstoppable, like he could crush anything and anyone. Speaking of crushing, Where the hell was that fishtail bastard? As if reading his thoughts, Nanaku stepped forward to face him. His fury rose as he questioned Che. Had he been pretending before? Playing with him? Well, it didn't matter. He'd still kill him here. He shot forward, yelling for Che to die. From the stands, his boys screamed for him to get back. Was he insane? What the hell was he doing? Unfazed, Che watched the lunging Nanaku with disinterest. His god complex grew as he wondered how well the shark would burn. Would his skin and flesh char? Or would he be reduced to nothing but ash? There was only one way to find out. Ignoring Tevin's shouts to stop, Che raised his hand, prepared to burn Nanaku to a crisp. His palm glowed with divine might, ready to unleash hell on the ignorant foe. Meanwhile, in Rokash's private room, the villain was freaking the hell out. His scar throbbed as he suffered severe PTSD. Those flames. Was it Leo haunting him from the grave? Refusing to allow him even a second of peace? Damn that old man. Shifting back to Che, the newly risen Kimyo was out for blood. Without a shred of mercy, he lit Nanaku up, burning his fishy ass with a cyclone of divine flames. Anguished screams and pleading followed the attack, but Che ignored them and continued his merciless slaughter. Finally, when there was nothing left to burn and Nanaku's corpse was charred to a crisp, Che let up and retracted his flames. He didn't look away, as if etching the visage of the first being he'd ever killed into his memory. His eyes as cold as ice. By his side, Tevin watched the whole thing unfold in shock. He didn't know it then, but later in life, he would realize this moment marked the descent of Che Hart into darkness. So many regrets would accompany him with age, but this was undoubtedly the worst of them. Maybe he should have tried harder to reach out to Che, to let him know he wasn't alone, that it wasn't his burden to bear alone. Leo had been their master too, and it was on all of them to avenge him. If only he'd said that. If only he'd stood by Che's side during that troubling time. Maybe things would have been different. Maybe the world wouldn't have been painted with the blood of those he killed. Maybe he wouldn't have become humanity's greatest enemy. Too bad the past couldn't be changed, and all he had was the present, or, in this case, the future. Because these were the regrets of future Tevin. For now, however, they were still in the past. So it was better to slow down and enjoy the story gradually. With the death of Nanaku, a tense silence spread through the arena. There was always a chance of death in these battles, but no one thought it would come so quickly, or so brutally. It took the audience a good while to even register what had just happened. Meanwhile, the culprit stood there unfazed by the stares burning into him. He casually powered down, dismissing the flames that cloaked his body. With their disappearance, the details of his talent became visible. It was the Ilios Phoenix Flame, or Sunfire talent. It allowed the user to enter the Ilios state, the same divine flame form seen earlier from both Che and Leo Thomas. In addition, it was categorized as one of the original 4 great talents. In other words, Che was about to pull mad bitches, burning maidens left and right. Okay, maybe not burn, but grill. Dude was about to grill some Caribbean cheeks. Moving on. Che, humanity's future greatest nemesis, finally retracted his talent and dropped to his knees. The strain from being in the Ilios state was far more draining than he'd expected, almost knocking him out. Luckily, he had just enough energy left to stay conscious, barely warding off the dizziness. Seeing this, Tevin snapped out of his shock and ran over, a cloth in hand. He hadn't forgotten that Che was still butt naked, showing his ass to literally thousands of people in the stands. Handing the cloth over, Tevin asked if he was okay, if his wounds were healing. Che replied that they were fine, though his body felt terrible. It was like he'd been tossed into a blender, then stitched back together, completely unbearable. Tevin sympathized, but then his face hardened. He demanded to know what the hell that was. Since when had they become murderous? Che lowered his head in shame. He had no excuse, at least not to someone he considered a brother. His lips twitched as if he wanted to speak, but ultimately, he stayed silent. Just as the tension between them started to thicken, a loud explosion went off in the room, drawing everyone's attention. The blast came from the private lounge reserved for Rokash. Realizing this, everyone focused in that direction, including the cameras filming the live broadcast of the event. Che and the gang did the same, their eyes burning with murderous intent. As all attention zeroed in on the lounge, Rokash suddenly emerged, his aura radiating boundless joy. To think that bastard Leo actually had such a hidden card up his sleeve. What a cunning old fox. Gazing intently at Che, he roared, demanding to know how Leo had done it. How had he transferred his power to him? Would Che tell him? Or would he have to pry the answer from his tortured corpse? Che didn't flinch. He met Rokash's gaze directly and warned him not to speak his master's name. He wasn't worthy of it. Laughing mockingly, Rokash asked what he would do if he did. Would he fight him? Did he really think that just because he got a little bit of power he was all that? Super hot fire? Nah, fuck that. In Rokash's eyes, he was still nothing more than a bug. He sneered, recalling him clearly. The inconsequential human who always clung to Leo's side. The powerless mortal who didn't even qualify to lick his feet. Gaining a talent didn't change that. At best, he was just a slightly bigger cockroach, still inconsequential and easy to kill, just like his master Leo. The moment those words left his mouth, loud gasps thundered across the arena. The crowd was stunned. Leo, the war hero, killed by his own former disciple? And that same disciple dumb enough to confess live on national TV? What a dumbass. Speaking of dumb, what kind of sins did this dude commit in his past life to be born that ugly? I know it's just a drawing, but damn, isn't that too much? What an unlucky bastard. Anyway, back to the drama. Ali, the shady pastor, practically rejoiced at Rokash's slip-up. They'd planned to beat the confession out of him, but who would have thought the cocky bastard would out himself? Wasn't this gift from Lady Luck a little too generous? What was next? A group of big booty Latinas calling him Papi. He wouldn't mind. He'd gladly manifest that shit. Anyway, back to Rokash, the still taunting fool. He kept shouting insults and daring the squad to come at him. He didn't fear their smoke, he welcomed it. He didn't mind sending them to an early reunion with their master. His taunts only stopped when his bodyguard revealed the grim truth. The idiot had just confessed to murder, on live television. Rokash's grin vanished. His brows tightened instantly. He didn't even get the chance to react before a squad of police officers burst in. Leading them was Inspector Ian Anthony, and he was pissed. He shouted at Rokash for his shamelessness, for daring to toy with them. The bastard knew their squad was in charge of investigating Leo's murder, yet Rokash had them guard the event. He'd killed Leo, thrown a party to celebrate it, and made them, the investigators, his security. Just how much did he intend to mock them? He'd pay for this insult. Noticing the rising tension, Rokash's bodyguard advised a retreat. They were still live on television, and killing cops in front of everyone wasn't exactly the best move. Rokash agreed and prepared to leave. Meanwhile, on the inspector's side, the entire squad drew their guns, shouting for Rokash to surrender. He was under arrest. As for his trusted bodyguard, he was ordered to step aside, unless he wanted to join Rokash in a cell. But Jonelli Honore wasn't having it. To hell with that peaceful bullshit, he wanted all the smoke. Confidently stepping forward, he shielded Rokash behind him. Then, under everyone's gaze, he activated his Kimyo talent, Akuma. A creation-type ability, Akuma allowed him to generate and shape metallic materials from his body, perfect for both offense and defense. Realizing Honore wouldn't back down, the officers lit his ass up. What last warning? The only warning he got was his one-way ticket to hell. They mercilessly opened fire, emptying their magazines into him. Unfortunately, Honore wasn't an easy nut to crack. He relied on his Akuma talent to effortlessly block every bullet. As for Rokash, the treacherous bastard used the chaos to slip away. He left some parting words for Che, but it was the same recycled trash talk as always. Nothing worth remembering. Che, however, had parting words of his own. With the live broadcast focused on him, he glared at the fleeing Rokash and stated coldly that he should run as far as he could. He should pray the police got to him first, because if Che did, he'd know torment, unlike anything else in the world. That would be his punishment for cutting short the life of the man who had raised them, their only father in this life. He warned him never to show his face again because he had just made his final mistake. Oh, and since the broadcast was still live, he'd like to give a shout out to Ray and Antoine. Nah, I'm just fucking with you. But kudos to anyone who got that reference. Back to the story. Rokash grinned sinisterly as he made his escape. He wasn't worried about Che's threat. In fact, he welcomed the smoke. So what if he'd killed the wolf and spared the cubs? What could they possibly do to him? They were just weaklings. If the opportunity came, he'd crush them completely, along with their stupid superhero poses. Who did they think they were? The Avengers. Fast forward 4 months later. The incident hadn't died down. It had only escalated. Rokash was still in hiding, evading the police and the domino effects of Leo's murder. After his open confession, the world now knew his crimes, and that a Kimyo had used his powers outside the arena to kill someone. This led to widespread panic and fear among the general populace, fueling growing tension between humans and Kimyos. Several skirmishes broke out, and this was just the beginning. Across the country, bans on Kimyos and their talents grew harsher, further deteriorating the situation. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that things were hanging by a thread, and another Kimyo versus human war wasn't far off. Such was the state of the world. Watching all this unfold on a smartphone, a lone figure sighed in annoyance. Kimyos and humans fighting? Discrimination and vigilante attacks rising? Businesses refusing to serve Kimyos because they were non-human? If they'd known the mess Rokash would create by killing Leo, they would have killed that bastard themselves. At least it would have saved the world from going crazy. Too bad it was too late now. Either way, it wouldn't stop them from fulfilling their mission. They had a task: to locate the golden boy himself, Che motherfucking Hart. Enter the main waifu of the story. And damn, she was smoking. Putting on her earphones, the waifu continued to mull over the current situation. Although she understood where the humans were coming from, she couldn't help but think they were making a mistake. Fear had clouded their judgment. What did they expect to happen if they kept discriminating against the Kimyos? Push them past their limits? It was obvious things wouldn't end well. But alas, humans were creatures of war. They had no appreciation for peace, nor the faintest idea how to maintain it. It wouldn't be a surprise if the world went to shit at this rate. Walking onward, the lady chastised the foolish humans and the naive ones who thought war breaking out was somehow a good thing. They'd been so drunk on peace that they deluded themselves into believing the last war had happened ages ago. But that wasn't the case at all. The Great War hadn't been that long ago, and the consequences and horrors it brought were still clear to anyone who paid enough attention. Speaking of war, let's dive a bit into the lore of this world. Back in the day, Kimyos and humans were at each other's throats, vying desperately for dominion over the world. Ever since the appearance of the first Kimyo in 1542, and the subsequent propagation of their species to nearly a third of the population, they had always believed they deserved to be the dominant race. They had superpowers and were strong as hell. Why would they need to bow to mere humans? That belief steadily spread, leading to an all-out war. For the more radical Kimyos, it wasn't just about dominance. It was about the complete annihilation of the human race, or as they called it, the purification of the bloodline. Thus, war broke out, forcing humans to band together just to barely hold the Kimyos back. Through countless sacrifices, they fought for their land, their people, while all the Kimyos did was slaughter and massacre. However, not all Kimyos followed this path. The many who did were corrupted, led, and influenced by one man, Cain, the strongest Kimyo and the father of the rebellion. Cain's power was beyond imagination. In the present day, the top 150 Kimyos are ranked and revered, but even among them, there's a massive difference between those in the top 10 and everyone else. The ones powerful enough to be in the top 10 are termed God tier, and Cain was ranked first among them. His power was overwhelming, and through his strength and influence alone, he managed to wage a war that lasted 124 years, finally ending in 1957. Surprisingly, despite his overwhelming might, Cain met his end in the most unexpected way: assassination. Now, I know what you're thinking. How the hell did Cain, the Big Papi, the numero uno of the big bads, fall to something like that? Well, the answer's simple. He fell by the hands of the war heroes. And who were the war heroes, you ask? Come closer, because I'm about to tell you. I won't gatekeep this shit. In 1942, East Cuba, Trinidad and Tobago, a group of children were assembled. Children who, unbeknownst to anyone, would one day shape the course of history. Left in charge of these kids was a menacing yet oddly seductive maiden, the lovely Colonel Catherine Forbes, better known in the streets as the Achilles. Catherine, despite her reservations, took in these kids, who were, unbelievably, new recruits for the war. In other words, child soldiers. She didn't like sending kids off to die, but the orders came from above, and the military was desperate. She had no choice. Gazing at the solemn faces of the children, she informed them that she would be their commanding officer from then on. It was her duty to make sure as many of them as possible survived and made it back home. Sure, some of them had signed up because their families and homes were destroyed, but she believed that as long as they lived, there was still hope. If they could just make it back alive, it wouldn't be too late to build another home. Growing more serious, she explained how their training would proceed. The few who were Kimyos would be trained separately from the regular recruits, but full effort was expected from both groups. Only then would they stand a chance against Cain, and maybe restore the world to the peace it once knew. Fast forward a few days later, and the story shifts to the perspective of a young trainee in the camp. After being there for a while, the place began to grow on him. He was fed, clothed, and treated well, something rare for an orphan and refugee like himself. Still, sometimes he couldn't help but wonder, why had he volunteered to come here? What was he searching for? He didn't know, but one thing was certain. He felt safe here, and that was enough. He was tired of seeing death. As he mulled over his life, a voice called out, breaking his thoughts. Looking up, he was surprised to see a girl his age, accompanied by her brother. She introduced herself as Elsa, and the boy as Kevin, orphans, just like him. They'd sought him out because he was too quiet. Everyone else was already getting along, but he kept to himself. Then, with the innocence only children possess, Elsa asked to be friends. Everyone needed company, after all. Blushing, the young boy quickly agreed, though deep down, he was a sly dog, secretly marveling at how pretty she was. Fast forward again, and trouble finally found the peaceful encampment. Several Kimyos attacked, reducing the land to a world of smoke and ash. Catherine was quickly evacuated from her tent, but judging by the scowl on her face, she was furious. How had those bastards found their location? It was supposed to be secret. Had someone snuck a spy into their ranks? If she found that bastard, she'd make sure to step on his face, which to some might sound like a reward. But fuck it, she'd do it anyway. Sensing her rage, one of the soldiers tried to cheer her up, reporting that the major had already been informed of the attack and had arrived to provide backup. Catherine visibly perked up at the news and ordered to be taken to him immediately. Enter Major Jamie Altham, better known in the streets as the Wolf Spider. Catherine met the war veteran and reported honestly, there was a spy among them. Someone was feeding intel to the enemy, including the location of their base. Jamie sighed. The last thing he wanted to deal with today was betrayal. Still, orders were orders. Headquarters was sending in an airstrike. They just had to hold out until then. As they spoke, several soldiers rushed in, bringing with them the children, except for 3 who were still missing. Jamie's expression sharpened. He commanded the troops to fall back. He'd find the kids himself. Catherine didn't stop him. She simply cheered him on, telling him to give them hell. And she had good reason to be confident. Jamie was a monster in his own right. A Kimyo. When faced with a gang of third-rate villain Kimyos, yeah, the kind that say dumb shit like this, Jamie didn't even flinch. He activated his Kimyo talent, blitzing through the crowd in an instant. By the time he paused, the entire group was bound and helpless, whimpering for mercy. Jamie showed none. He diced them like meat for the devil's dinner. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the camp, the sly boy and his newfound crush were hiding. After escaping from the Kimyos, they holed up in a crumbling building, but they both knew it wouldn't hold for long. Scared, Elsa asked if they'd be okay. The boy assured her they would, but not if they stayed. They had to keep moving. He promised to protect her and Kevin, no matter what. And just as he finished making that promise, fate laughed in his face. They were discovered. A patrolling Kimyo spotted them, forcing the trio to flee. Terrified, they ran with everything they had, but it was clear. Someone had to stay behind to buy time. Stealing his resolve, the boy told them to go on without him. he'd hold the line. Elsa tried to argue, but he reminded her of his promise. He intended to keep it. Then, to her shock, he burst into flames, charging headfirst into the fray. Using his flame talent, he unleashed chaos, burning everything unfortunate enough to stand in his path. Divine flames towered into the sky, mingled with the anguished screams of the dying. At the same time, in another part of the battlefield, Jamie was also facing off against his fair share of enemies. Crimson threads of death blanketed the ground, dicing every Kimyo that crossed his path. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Flames. The entire camp was burning. Fearing for the missing children, Jamie finished off the remaining foes and ran toward the fire, calling their names. But nothing could have prepared him for what he found: death, flames, and destruction. And at the center of it all stood a young boy, baptized in blood and ash, surrounded by hundreds of corpses. That boy's name was Leo Thomas, and his story had just begun. Shifting back to the present, we're reunited with the homie Che Hart. After his successful Kimyo transformation, he seemed to have put on more muscle mass, practically bursting out of his tank top, with enough veins to tie down an ox. Goddamn. What didn't change, however, were his feelings toward his slain master, Leo Thomas. Occasionally, he would look at their pictures together, reminiscing about the good old days, back when it was just the three of them. How wonderful those days were. Speaking of good old days, we get another flashback to 1957, Trinidad, in the middle of the Kimyo versus human war. After fighting bravely and relentlessly against the Kimyo army, the human side was inevitably suppressed, pinned down for an eventual slaughter. Morale plummeted drastically, leading the soldiers to question their leader. When were they going to give the command to retreat? They were on the brink of being wiped out, goddammit. To this, the sergeants could only grit their teeth and tell them to wait. Help was on the way. The soldiers called bullshit on that. What kind of help could possibly turn this shit show around? If they had that much firepower, why didn't they deploy it earlier? The sergeant simply told them to have faith. All they had to do was wait, and everything would make sense. The soldiers almost lost their shit at that reply. They were about to lose their lives. What could possibly be worth that risk? Just as they were about to crash out, an aircraft engine roared from above, heralding the arrival of reinforcements. When the soldiers saw who had come to rescue them, they couldn't help but exclaim in shock. Had that hero really come to aid them? But if so, did that mean he came as well? While they were still processing it, the reinforcement, Major Altham, also known as the Spider Wolf, let it rip, blitzing the battlefield with a machine gun. Thanks to the blessing of lead, the enemy forces were swiftly decimated, drastically reducing the pressure on the Allied side. However, not all tangos were eliminated. The big, bad, and ugly managed to survive, mounting a counterattack on the aircraft. Realizing this, Altham, the Spider Wolf, clicked his tongue in annoyance before addressing his co-pilot. It was his time to shine. The co-pilot agreed and unfastened his seatbelt, switching to active support mode. He climbed out of the cockpit, scaling up the aircraft until he was standing atop the wings. Under Altham's constant urging and taunts, he began charging a big move, planning to buy their troops an opening to retreat. Meanwhile, on the ground, the lava Kimyo, part of the big, bad, and especially ugly, finished preparing his attack and asked for permission to light the aircraft up. With his firepower, he was sure bringing down those bastards wouldn't be a problem. Unfortunately, he was just a second too late. By the time his attack was ready, an even more formidable and terrifying blast was already raining down toward them. The entire battlefield lit up like an erupting volcano, death, ash, and destruction everywhere. Wherever the flames went, annihilation followed, leaving looks of awe and reverence on the soldiers' faces. Was this the promised reinforcement? No wonder the sergeant told them to have faith. Who wouldn't have faith in such overwhelming power? But that aside, was it really him? That flame, that absurd destructive power. Who else could it be but the kid Altham adopted? The one and only Leo freaking Thomas, now grown up and sporting a more mature vibe. Unfortunately for Altham, mature didn't mean responsible. Leo recklessly tossed away his helmet and oxygen mask, saying they made him look less cool. What was the point of saving allies if he couldn't look cool doing it? How else was he supposed to pull bitches? To this, Altham could only grit his teeth in irritation. praying to the heavens that this thirsty bastard would grow up soon. Cursing his shitty luck, he hadn't even finished regretting adopting this maiden-obsessed lunatic when Leo came with more troubling news. He planned to jump off the plane and crash land on the battlefield, thinking he'd be more useful through a hands-on approach. Why blast them from the air when he could just blitz them with the old left-right goodnight? Incredulous, Altham told him to stop spewing nonsense. If he jumped off that plane, forget the fall, he'd kill him himself. Regrettably, Leo wasn't keen on listening to orders. How could he, when flexing and maiden-pulling points were waiting for him down below? He faked an accident before jumping straight off the plane, all under Altham's furious roars and curses. Halfway to the ground, the craziness of his plan finally hit him, and he couldn't help but regret it. Damn it, he should have at least kept the mask on. What a foolish way to go. Definitely not cool at all. Meanwhile on the ground, the Kimyos watching couldn't help but notice the absurdity, shocked that anyone could be that stupid. But hey, what did it have to do with them? At best, they could light his ass up and save him from the agony of splattering to his death. Shifting scenes, we're taken to an abandoned building at the rear of the battlefield, where an interrogation is underway. Conducting said interrogation is Major Altham, the Spider Wolf, rumored to be the last person you'd ever want interrogating you. True to reputation, the captive only endured half the torture before folding like a fan, promising to snitch on everything he knew, and even some things he didn't, just to get this psycho away from him. Altham didn't seem surprised and readily accepted his surrender. However, as he stood up, an intense killing intent flashed briefly in his eyes. He told the captive he was wise and reasonable. Too bad he couldn't say the same about the rest of his squad. Above them hung dozens of corpses, all bound and wrapped, having likely suffered excruciating pain before their inevitable demise. Grinning evilly, he told the captive to start talking. He needed to get back to the battlefield. Who knew what kind of shit show that troublesome Leo was stirring up? He had to return before the kid burned the whole place to the ground. Fast forward to after the battle. We're reunited with Colonel Catherine Forbes, and the muscle mommy is looking as menacing and sexy as ever. Joining her is the Spider Wolf, back from his mission. Impressed by his report, Catherine praised Altham for a job well done before shifting the conversation to Leo, asking how he was doing. She'd heard a lot of good things about him. The soldiers couldn't stop glazing him, especially the maidens, who thought he'd grown up into a total poppy. Altham replied that Leo was faring well, albeit a little careless, but he was confident the boy would grow out of it soon enough. Intrigued, Catherine teased him for his dedication to Leo. He might say he was just guiding the kid, but they both knew he saw him as something like a younger brother. Altham didn't deny it but added that wasn't the only reason for his concern. Leo was dangerous. Out of all the Kimyos he'd ever seen, Leo's destructive power was unmatched. He was practically a walking sun. If not nurtured properly, he could become a serious threat to the entire human race. Catherine nodded gravely and changed the topic. It was time to discuss why she'd called him in. Another of Kane's military air bases had been discovered, and it was his mission to bring it down, including the 13 working carrier planes that had to be destroyed no matter what. They couldn't let Kane get his hands on them. It would be disastrous for their troops. As for who would join him on the mission, the answer was no one. Their forces were spread too thin. However, he could bring Leo along if he wished. Speaking of Leo, the moment he saw his master, he immediately started glazing. He bragged about his excellent battlefield performance, claiming that everyone considered him a hero. In fact, many believed he should get his own plane, to fight battles of course, and not to pick up waifus. But if the opportunity arose, why shouldn't he? Altham ignored him and told him to get ready. With his recklessness, he wouldn't trust him with a can opener, let alone a fighter jet. Still, if he performed well on this mission, he might consider letting him fly on their way back home. Leo immediately lit up at the news, his eyes literally shining. He promised Altham he'd do his best, so his master better not go back on his word. Then, like an excited puppy, he scurried off to prepare. Busy with the task, he didn't notice someone creeping up on him. Only when they spoke did he realize their presence. That someone, unbelievably, was the maiden Elsa, now grown up and radiant as ever. And maybe it's just me, but she kinda looks like a dude. Wait, could this be a trap? Run, Leo, run. Or maybe stay. Depends on what you like. Leaning in, Elsa, the possible trap, kissed Leo and warned him not to die. If he foolishly got himself killed, she'd follow him into heaven just to beat his ass. Leo readily agreed, promising to make it back no matter what. But when he did, she better get ready with that sucky, because it was about to be a meat buffet in this bitch. Shifting scenes again, we're taken to the East Air Base, their target. After landing half a mile away, the duo of master and apprentice made their way toward the base. Though it was crawling with enemies, just like this bootleg Black Wolverine, or Blackarine, the pair made quick work of them, slaughtering their way to the destination. However, when they arrived, things took an unexpected twist. The countless civilians previously reported missing were all imprisoned there, for reasons unknown. Too young and inexperienced to grasp the gravity of the situation, Leo grinned widely, already picturing the rewards and fame. If he managed to complete the mission successfully, forget the merits. Who knew what freaky shit Elsa might do to him? To that, he could only say, "Arigato gozaimasu." Altham, on the other hand, was sharp enough to know this didn't bode well. If that bastard Kane was taking hostages, there had to be a reason, and it sure as hell wasn't a good one. They had to report back to HQ, but first, a little more investigation was in order. Sneaking deeper into the base, they aimed to uncover more secrets, but what they found instead left them terrified. Right there before them stood the source of their nightmares, the devil himself, the publicly acknowledged strongest Kimyo to ever walk the earth. Kane, the demon Kimyo. Horrified, Altham almost shit his pants. He racked his brain, trying to figure out how this was possible. Wasn't Kane supposed to be overseas? Then why was he here, in such an unassuming airbase of all places? He didn't know what was going on, but one thing was certain. They had to get the hell out of there. Kane the demon wasn't a foe they could handle, especially not on their own. Thus, without hesitation, they quickly fled, radioing back to headquarters for reinforcements. After chopping it up with the big dogs at HQ, specifically the muscle mommy Catherine, an order was swiftly passed down. They argued that meeting Kane, although extremely dangerous, was too much of an opportunity to pass up. The best course of action was to mobilize the entire army and besiege him. Hopefully, they'd stand a chance at bringing down the menace for good. Regrettably, things weren't that simple. At the rate the planes were loading up, Kane would be gone in 30 minutes, let alone the hour needed to assemble the army. Thus, if they needed to force him to stay and later implement the siege tactic, Leo and Altham would have to stall for time, meaning the two of them would be facing off against Earth's mightiest Kimyo. Realizing this, a crazed grin spread across Altham's face. To face off against the strongest and hopefully not die. Could there be a better legacy than that? And even if they did die, could there be a better death for war dogs like them? He welcomed the challenge. His fighting spirit surged. Acting on that hype, they set to work. First blitzing the shit out of Kane's men. The group of normies didn't even react before they were stabbed in the head. Next came Kane, but the strongest Kimyo wasn't an easy nut to crack. The second the attacks landed, he was already moving, preparing a counterattack. With seamless ease, he flicked his hand, effortlessly squashing Leo's fireball. The attack couldn't even get close before it was intercepted and snuffed out like a candle in the wind. Enter the strongest talent, Thanatos, a psychic-type ability. The exact details had never been accurately recorded, but the general consensus was that it was powerful as fuck. When wielded correctly, it supposedly had the power to end all life on Earth and anywhere else. In short, Kane was him. And so long as he lived, he'd undoubtedly be the biggest cheek clapper on the planet. Back to the fight. Kane finally broke his silence. His voice was grating and layered, sounding like 1,000 souls talking simultaneously. If that's hard to imagine, picture me and my 1,000 huzz whispering in your ear. Because, as we all know, I get bitches. Anyway, with that grating voice, Kane asked who they were. The army? Feeling the pressure and trying to diffuse the tension, the duo replied jokingly that they were evangelists, here to chat about their Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And if he wasn't of that religion, he should forget the joke and come at them. Kane said, "Bet," and squared off, finally giving a full view of his magnificence. Turns out he was a 7-foot behemoth, which, in my opinion, is unnecessary. No one needs to be that tall. especially if he's already this cool looking. Come on, can he leave some maidens for us? How are short kings like us supposed to clap with such competition? Anyway, Short King rant aside, the face-off continued. Through his weird demon-like face, Cain demanded an answer. Were they from the army or not? Or alternatively, were they just two random soldiers who'd snuck in to pledge allegiance to the mighty him? Altham replied that they were neither. They were just two reckless fools who'd come in search of a good fight, and, if necessary, a good death. Cain picked up on their sarcasm and decided not to waste any more time. He stretched out his hand and activated his talent, Thanatos. Loud warning bells sounded in the duo's minds, forcing them to dodge frantically. In the spot they'd once stood, a huge explosion carved out a massive crater. The duo sighed in relief, but Cain wasn't done. With another flick of his hand, the ground tore apart, writhing to life like it had a mind of its own. Their target was Leo, dazed and confused by the absurd changes. Just as the wave-like concrete was about to smash him whole, Leo finally snapped out of it and evaded successfully, using his Ilios talent to propel forward and barely save himself. However, Cain wasn't keen on letting him escape. For every wave Leo dodged, 3 more took its place, soon trapping him in an ocean of concrete waves. Things became increasingly dire, leaving Leo with no way out. Finally, after a careless mistake and some bad luck, Leo's leg was trapped, leaving him at the mercy of Cain's barrage. The concrete waves closed in around him, sealing him in a tomb of stone and death. Luckily, Leo wasn't alone. In his time of need, his master answered the call, pushing his power to the limit. Exerting maximum force, Altham swung his strings like a madman, successfully dicing through the concrete. In addition to freeing Leo, he diverted some of his strings toward Cain, foiling his ambush with the giant serpent. Thus, Leo was free, and once again ready to wreak havoc on the battlefield. Without hesitation, he charged Cain, shooting flame bursts through the air. As he did, Altham gave him more intel about Cain and his Kimyo talent, Thanatos. Legend had it that it was by far the strongest talent, requiring 3 talents of equal strength just to barely contend with it. Undoubtedly, it wasn't something they could handle alone, so their mission today was survival. Stall for time until reinforcements arrived. Leo nodded and fired a massive fireball at Cain. For anyone else, that would have been enough, but Cain easily tanked it and counterattacked immediately. From the flames burst out the serpent, lunging for Leo's face. The sudden ambush scared the shit out of him, leaving little time to react, but luckily his reflexes were strong, barely enabling him to dodge at the last second. Seeing this, Altham shouted a worried reminder, "Don't get bitten by the serpent." He explained that the serpent was part of Cain's skill, and getting bitten by it was the same as having your soul sucked. Pause. Seriously though, the serpent was Cyberus, the great serpent, and its power was to absorb any soul for its master Cain. Realizing Altham had more intel on him than he'd thought, Cain spawned before them, hands ready to attack. He wasn't particularly worried about the two, but a quick resolution was wise. Thus he activated his ability again, ready to blow the duo to smithereens. The two could only grit their teeth and fight desperately, buying time for the reinforcements. Speaking of reinforcements, we shift back to the main camp where a whole battalion was assembling. Leading them was the familiar Colonel Catherine Forbes, #1 muscle mommy and certified war maiden of the army. With her trusty, low-key, super cool war axe in hand, she gave orders to march. One of the lieutenants called out, asking how many tanks they should bring along. Catherine answered without hesitation, "Bring every goddamn last one of them. In fact, so long as it had wheels and could attack, they should bring it. Even a slingshot strapped to a unicycle would be useful at this point." The lieutenants saluted, indicating they understood. However, there was one troubling matter she needed to be made aware of. He explained that during Leo's call he'd mentioned Cain's men were loading cargo planes. Judging by the plane's capacity and the assumed speed of the loaders, it would take approximately 30 minutes to finish. But the army was more than an hour away, meaning Leo and Altham would be forced to fight Cain to stall for time. He told her that even as they were standing there, Leo and Altham were probably already engaged in battle with Cain, a surefire suicidal move, as she knew all too well. True to that deduction, at the base, Leo and Altham were locked in a desperate fight. They threw everything they had at him, barely escaping death by a hair's breadth. Leo charged in with a sidekick whipping toward Kane's face, but Kane effortlessly dodged, grabbed Altham, and blasted both master and disciple halfway across the room. When they landed, they scraped along the ground like trash, finally crashing to a halt in pitiful positions. This was especially true for Leo, who, for some reason, had his cheeks arched up as if he were waiting for something. Pause. Just as he was about to get up from his sussy position, Leo noticed something that made his face drop. Civilians, loads of them, locked in cages. This enraged him, partly because of the inhumane treatment, but mostly because, with them around, he couldn't fully unleash his Ilios talent, lest he burn them all to death. Picking up on his strained expression, Kane immediately guessed what was going on. In a mocking tone, he asked if Leo knew any of them. Were there perhaps loved ones of his in there as well? Altham replied for Leo, "Don't fuck with them." They were not interested in Kane's petty threats or psychological games. Using the brief second Kane was distracted, Altham infused a significant amount of energy into the ground, preparing for a sneak attack. When everything was ready and Kane was still spewing his recruitment speech, Altham let it rip, tagging the strings he'd buried underground. The strings led back to Kane, trapping him in a prison of crimson thread. His whole body was immobilized, seized and controlled like a puppet. Seeing this, Leo prepared his trump card. He infused a significant amount of energy into Altham's dagger, morphing it into a giant claymore of flames. The heat wave from the blade swept through the room, giving everyone a taste of its power. As for Leo, he was already on the move, charging toward Kane with murderous intent. Just as he was about to launch his finisher, Kane, who'd been trapped and silent this whole time, spoke for the first time. He sighed at their stubbornness, refusing recruitment even when he was asking nicely. Well, there was nothing left to do. He'd just have to kill them now. Saying so, he easily broke free from the trap, proving he'd never really been trapped, and gave the duo no time to react, sending his serpent lunging for the advancing Leo. Altham's face changed drastically. He shouted for Leo to be careful. They'd fallen for a trap, but it was already too late. Cyberus had locked onto Leo's soul. Acting on instinct, Altham shot out his fastest strings, hoping to reach Leo in time. Luckily, they wrapped around him and yanked Leo from the serpent's jaws. Enraged, Kane turned his fury on the hostages. Since the duo insisted on meddling with his plans, he'd take out his anger on them. He'd kill them all. Their blood would be on the hands of the meddlesome duo. Alarmed, Leo rushed to intercept. Although he knew it was a trap, deliberate bait Kane had cast, he couldn't stop himself from falling for it. Against better judgment, he dashed to the front of the cage, planning to use himself as a meat shield. Gritting his teeth, he apologized to Elsa in his mind, realizing this might be the end, and he wouldn't keep his promise to her. He also felt bad about the missed sucky. But what else could he do? He was a hero. This was what heroes did. He steeled himself for the inevitable. But just as things seemed over, a string shot in and wrapped around him tightly. Against his will, the string yanked him back, pulling him from the cage. Following the sudden twist came a gentle voice calling him stupid. Did he really think they'd let him sacrifice himself? To this, Leo cried bitterly, telling Altham not to do it. This was his sacrifice to make. Altham ignored him and continued to pull, then with steady resolve stepped up to take his place. He told Leo to live on. This wouldn't be where he died. His purpose in life was grander than Altham's, so he had to survive no matter what. With tears in his eyes, he told Leo he would be the hero to save the world, and that guiding him and standing beside him as a brother were the greatest moments of his life. Finished with his tearful goodbye, he roared at Kane to come at him. If Kane wanted to harm the hostages, he'd have to get through Altham first. Kane sneered at the pitiful resistance, calling it a meaningless sacrifice. What good would one fool possibly do against his power? Fine, he'd just kill them all, hostages and all. At the same time, on the eastern front of the airbase, the chocolate mommy Colonel Catherine Forbes finally made her entrance. She led a battalion of soldiers, tanks, and aircraft, charging relentlessly through the enemy lines. With firm resolve, but visible worry in her eyes, she urged the soldiers to get a move on, reminding them that two of their own were in danger. If they slacked off and caused the deaths of Leo and Altham, she'd personally crush them to death with her thick thighs. Speaking of thick, was it just me, or is she looking mad thick in this panel right here? There was honestly no reason to give her this much cheek real estate, but hey, I'm not mad at it. Now, back to the story. While she was giving orders to her men, one of the lieutenants called out to her, yelling that they had bad news. Kane's army had assembled on the hilltop, blocking their way to the airbase. Frustrated, Catherine clicked her tongue in annoyance and ordered her men to charge forward. A few rogue soldiers couldn't do shit to stop their advance. Meanwhile, back at the airbase, the aftermath of Kane's attack finally became visible. The whole base was a mess, completely destroyed, with the only intact place being the cage Altham had protected. He'd shielded it from Kane's wrath, but the same couldn't be said for his own flesh. His body had been cleaved in two, Gojo style, with his torso and legs chilling side by side. The scene was beyond heartbreaking, especially for Leo, who knelt defeated, mourning the death of his mentor and brother. Kane, on the other hand, didn't give a damn, and continued dissing the shit out of the slain Altham. He called him weak, with a brittle body, as expected of a lesser Kimyo. If he was that weak to begin with, he shouldn't have meddled in the affairs of the big dogs such as himself. Hearing this, Leo roared in rage. He yelled out Kane's name, pain and fury evident in his tone. Like an exploding supernova, he burst into flames, his embers scorching the entire room. Nevertheless, Kane still watched on with that same unbothered, deadpan look on his face. It was clear he didn't consider Leo a threat at all, just an insignificant bug he could crush at any moment. True to this, he leisurely gave Leo some lore about his powers. Turns out the history of the four great powers held more significance than Leo had imagined. They were, surprisingly, the very first supernatural powers to ever exist on Earth. Back in ancient Greece, before the concept of Kimyos even existed, four brothers developed the abilities that would later be termed Kimyo talents. They were Thanatos, Ilios, and two more whose identities remain mysterious for now. In a sense, the talents were siblings to each other, forever linked, and the only ones capable of truly rivaling one another. As expected, when these abilities first appeared, the people of Greece didn't know what to do in the face of such power. So, they did what humans tend to do. They treated the siblings as gods, worshipping them. Explaining up to this point, Kane wanted to continue with the lore, but Leo told him to pause real quick. Couldn't he hear the boss music playing in the background? It was time for him to power up. Saying so, he began his transformation, morphing into a half-flame, half-man deity, an omega symbol floating behind his head. He truly resembled a god, the very same kind Kane had been talking about. However, Leo was in no mood to admire his transformation. He roared Kane's name, charging at him to avenge Altham. Arriving before him, he unleashed a divine fist, blanketing the room in embers. Kane casually blocked the attack, continuing his monologue. He told Leo that they both carried the power of the gods, the talents that started it all. If they joined forces instead of standing in each other's way, they could reign again, stand above everyone as gods. Couldn't he imagine it? Mortals shaking in fear before them, nations submitting to their rule, waifus throwing themselves at them, and most importantly, clapping all the cheeks they wanted. A true cheek buffet. Didn't he want in on that? Surely he must have dreamed of tenderizing Catherine and her thick ass at least once. Well, if he joined him, he could make that happen. All he had to do was say yes. Gazing scornfully at the horny villain, Leo responded with a firm no. He had no desire to lord over others, nor did he have any particular liking for Kane as a person. Matter of fact, he actually hated his guts, believing his existence was harmful to the planet. So joining forces was out of the question. But all that aside, it seemed Kane still didn't understand the full extent of his crimes. He'd killed the one person Leo cared about the most. Did he really think he'd let that shit go? Nah. He was about to go mucho loco on his ass. Saying so, he entered his second transformation, morphing into a blue flame, winged angel of destruction. His aura became overwhelming, crushing and scorching the ground beneath him. Unfazed, Kane told him to come at him. He would make him understand the foolishness of defying him, of turning down the blissful life of Huz he'd planned for them. Leo said bet and charged forward, his thirst for revenge overshadowing his lust. Although he knew he stood no chance against Cain on his own, he was still ready to give his life in that fight. For the sake of the world and all those he cared about, he was ready to make that sacrifice. Cain welcomed his charge with obvious disdain, taunting that his death would be just that, death. There would be no honor to his sacrifice. Elsewhere, as the two titans went at it, Catherine was leading her troops through a difficult battle. She led the charge at the front, swinging her giant axe at a tank. With a deafening explosion, the tank was blown to bits, obliterating all enemies inside. Then, without so much as a glance backward, she continued her charge, yelling for her men to push through. Back in the warehouse, the battle against Cain had reached its climax. Leo's attacks finally reached him, breaking through his defenses and advancing for his face. This surprised Cain, as he hadn't anticipated Leo ever breaking through. Flustered, he ordered his serpent to attack, commanding it to devour Leo's soul. The serpent obeyed without question, biting into Leo's arm. It began its devouring process, delighting Cain, who couldn't help but mock Leo. He called him a fool for turning down his offer. Now the only future he had was to be devoured and turned into a soul slave. He really should have picked the huzz and godhood when he had the chance. But just as Cain was feeling himself, he suddenly realized something was gravely wrong. Leo had set a trap, and he'd walked right into it. The bastard had anticipated Cain dropping his shield to attack him, and had prepared precisely for that moment. Now, with his shield down and his serpent occupied, he was particularly vulnerable to a counterattack from Leo, one Leo viciously delivered. Blue flames blossomed in his arms, and he clawed forward, striking the shit out of Cain. The pain and flames sent him reeling, causing him to scream in agony. Reacting quickly, he unleashed a shockwave, pushing Leo away from his body. He managed to salvage some of the damage, but the critical hit had already been dealt. As for Leo, he was sent flying like a rag doll, crashing pathetically beside the hostage cage. When he came to his senses, he took one glance at the hostages and immediately knew what he had to do. He told them to hang tight. He'd get them out of there. Then, without further delay, he dug his feet into the ground, flexed his rock-hard abs, and pushed with all his might. Thanks to the boost from his flames, he managed to push the cage out of the building, saving the civilians trapped inside. Meanwhile, on Cain's side, things had taken a drastic turn. The critical wound had grown worse, releasing all the souls he had trapped inside him. Since he was a being made of souls, this was undoubtedly a lethal wound. Panicked and frustrated, he yelled at his general, Hitler, the Führer, asking when the plane would be ready. Hitler replied that the plane was ready. All they had to do was get the hell out of there. And so, the duo boarded the plane, disappearing from the airbase in an instant. After they left, Catherine finally broke through to the airbase. She led her men in one final charge, prioritizing the rescue of civilians over finding Cain. After some diligent effort, she rounded up everyone, including Leo, who had passed out after saving the hostages. Of course, by then, Cain was long gone, halfway to wherever the hell he was going with Hitler. As for the hostages, all of them were successfully evacuated, with everyone from the missing persons list accounted for. When everyone was set to move out, the only one still left was Catherine, holding Leo in her arms while mourning Altham's death. I don't know what kind of relationship they had, but judging by the tears, the dead homie was definitely tapping that. And another side note, the artist really did Leo dirty in this panel. Goddamn. Fast forward to a month later, we're taken to the San Fernando General Hospital. In a room housing the valiant Papi Leo, 3 soldiers walked in with news. They reported that Cain was dead, supposedly succumbing to the injuries Leo had inflicted. Because of that, both he and Altham were regarded as heroes, forever celebrated and given medals for bringing down the great evil, Cain. After that, everyone started treating him like some kind of savior. But in truth, he didn't feel like one at all. The flames that were revered by all, a symbol of power and hope, were nothing more than burdens to him, as they reminded him of a past he very much wanted to forget. A past where he couldn't save the one person who had saved him, his brother and mentor, Altham. Truly sad indeed, but let's quell that sadness with a bit of lore about the Kimyo world. According to publicly disclosed records, there are 3 ways a person can become a Kimyo. First is through a talent transfer. The individual who possesses the talent, with enough experience and training, has the ability to mentally transfer their Kimyo talent to another, though the process comes with severe consequences. The worst of which being that the process is fatal, meaning the second you pass on your talent, you immediately die. So yeah, the process isn't recommended unless you're truly curious about heaven and would like to go check things out over there. More often than not, this process is used by the strongest Kimyos on the top 150 list as a way to preserve their talent and pass it on within their families as inheritance. Now that is true generational wealth. The second method is through talent extraction. It involves forcefully and painfully extracting the talent from one person and passing it on to another. Of course, it's illegal as hell. But that didn't stop Cain, who was widely known to suck Kimyos dry, pause, and pass on their powers to his followers. And although not canon, rumors have it that this talent had been passed down in the bloodline of Papi Jiraiya's family, explaining how the pervy sage could extract cheeks from all those maidens in the ninja world. What a horny dog. The third method is through object possession. Though incredibly rare, some talents have the ability to develop consciousness, independent thought, and life force. When they do, they can possess an object, transferring their power to said object. If wielded by a user, the wielder can then harness the power of the talent, giving them the power of a Kimyo. Those are the only known ways to become a Kimyo. There are none apart from those. And the only option left is to live with the fate you were born with, whether human or Kimyo. For Che, that had been the case as well, surviving as a human in a world of Kimyos. Unlike the old days, when Kimyos were rare and their interactions with humans were banned, the new world embraced Kimyos, making survival among them not so difficult. In fact, the peace between the two groups had grown so strong that they were even trusted with setting up martial arts competitions among themselves, leading to the establishment of dojos such as the Red Ember Gym and the widespread desensitization toward Kimyo power. These days, every Tom, Dick, and Harry has seen a Kimyo use their power at least once or has close ties with one. Kimyos are no longer a big deal. Most people tend to forget, or even ignore, that these superhumans with incredible power walk among them every day, brushing past them in the streets. However, the same couldn't be said about the past. Back then, Kimyos were rare as hell, and any encounter with one was an event worthy of being recorded in a history book. To fully explain this, we flash back to 1815, to the Battle of Waterloo. And yes, I know what you're thinking. This story does have way too many flashbacks. It's like watching Inception, a flashback within a flashback within another flashback. Or more accurately, reliving the trauma of your ex bringing up old shit whenever you argue. Curse that bitch. Anyway, during that time, unlike now, where the Kimyo population makes up a third of all people, Kimyos were incredibly rare, and most battles were won by human effort alone. Just like the current battle, where Napoleon and his forces had the 7th Coalition and the Prussian army on the ropes. After enduring Napoleon's genius tactics and bombardments, the Allied forces couldn't take it anymore and called out to their commander, Blücher, for help. They'd already been pushed to the trenches. Wasn't it about time they retreated? Or at least sent for the Reaper for reinforcement? Blücher replied that he'd already done so. The call for reinforcements had been sent a long time ago. They just had to wait for the Reaper and hope that he deemed their cause worthy of intervention. Elsewhere, at the rear, the other commander, Duke Arthur Wellesley, was discussing tactics with his men when a messenger arrived. After catching his breath and bowing to the commander, he reported that things weren't looking good on the battlefield. The conqueror Napoleon had called for reinforcements, and his army was slowly overwhelming their forces. Blücher was asking for their support as well, specifically requesting the Reaper, because only he could turn the tide at this point. Arthur sighed in reluctance, but ultimately he knew what had to be done. Although he didn't want to use this card, Napoleon had forced his hand, leaving him no choice. He called out to the man sitting behind him, telling him it was time to enter the battlefield. The man replied that he was a soldier, so it was only natural. It was his duty. He quickly accepted the summons, referring to Arthur as father. The man was, shockingly, Jack Reaper, a Kimyo. Because Kimyos were so rare, most battles were won by humans alone. But on the off chance a Kimyo did get involved, they had the power to single-handedly turn things around. The Kimyos of that time were strong as hell. Back on the front lines, the valiant soldiers watched as Jack galloped into the battlefield. For those unaware, the sight was majestic. But for the few who knew, a chill ran down their spines. Without hesitation, they shouted for their men to get down. Otherwise, they wouldn't even know how they died. Jack ignored the commotion and continued riding toward the enemy forces. His lone silhouette charging an entire army made for a peculiar sight, but the conqueror wasn't dumb enough to let him get close. He commanded his men to open fire. To hell with whether the man was brave or stupid. He'd feed him lead all the same. The soldiers opened fire, blanketing the sky with bullets. In response, Jack leaped off his slain horse, continuing his charge on foot. When he landed, his eyes flashed purple, making Blucher scream for everyone to get down. If they didn't listen this time and stubbornly stuck their heads out, well, he could only send them ahead. Don't worry, you'll get that joke in a second. And no, it's not a dirty one. Though I wish it was. We're talking about head, after all. Jack flapped his jacket open, unveiling his Kimyo talent, a tentacle-like appendage. At the end of it was a ghastly scythe, paying homage to his title as the Reaper. Then, under the tense gaze of his foes, Jack grabbed the scythe, swung it with all his might, and consequently chopped off the heads of everyone on the front line. He had, in every sense of the word, sent them ahead. Grabbing hold of the scythe again, he unleashed his next attack, dicing the second line of foes into pieces. His killing range was incredibly vast, threatening everyone on the battlefield. Luckily, his allies had sought cover, or the massacre would have been mutual. Finished with the first two lines, Jack swung his scythe, reaping the third. His overwhelming might made quick work of them, decimating the enemy by the thousands. Fed up with long-range bullying, he charged in for something more close and personal. His scythe danced like the hips of a Persian mommy, proving that hips truly don't lie. In this case, it was a dance of death. With every swing, life was extinguished. A soldier frantically reloading barely blinked twice before the man on his right was yeeted by a scythe. The same thing happened to the man on his left, leaving him shaking with fear. In his final moments, as he watched Jack the Reaper dash out of the fog like they were playing Assassin's Creed or some shit, he couldn't help but curse his luck for being born in this flintlock era. If he'd been in the modern era, he would have introduced Jack personally to a beauty called the automatic rifle, thoroughly cooking his ass. While Jack was wreaking havoc on the battlefield, butchering soldiers like he was slaughtering chickens, Napoleon finally realized the gravity of the situation. He stood dazed, pupils dilated, wondering what he was seeing. But just as he was about to order a retreat, the executioner's blade came swinging down, dicing the hell out of him. And so, the Battle of Waterloo ended, with Napoleon slain by the blade of the infamous serial killer, Jack the cheek-clapping Reaper. As the flashback draws to a close, the speaker, who I'm assuming is Chi, stresses that although Kimyos were rare back then, they contributed significantly to the peace the current world now enjoys. They fought for that peace with their lives, even though they were forced to do so from the shadows. In contrast, the modern world has grown to embrace Kimyos. Coexistence with humans is now commonplace, with most not even thinking twice about it. Of course, this is partly due to the efforts of the government, but mostly due to the nature of Kimyo talents. Segregation simply isn't possible, as Kimyos can be born in any family, even those writing the laws or harboring bias. In such cases, both groups have no choice but to get along. Doing otherwise might very well mean alienating a loved one. In addition, coexistence with Kimyos comes with advantages. Some of their powers are so incredibly useful to society that entire industries would crumble without them. They've become so integral that life itself wouldn't function properly without their contributions. Reflecting on this, the speaker, again, presumably Che, hits us with some worldly wisdom. He says, "As you walk your path in life, make sure to protect the brother walking beside you, because their journey led them to you. And another thing, don't be lazy. Go out there and get bitches." Ending the flashback, we shift back to the present, specifically to the clinic of Che's doctor, Evan. After looking through Che's medical records, the old healer couldn't help but exclaim in shock, wondering how any of that was possible. All his injuries, from the ruptured muscles to the severe hemorrhoids, were gone, disappeared as if they'd never existed. Just what kind of steroids did he take? Or had he made a quick trip to Colombia for that sweet, sweet Escobar sauce? Because only the white booger sugar could possibly bring about such miraculous results. Che responded by flashing his muscles. He didn't have to do all that, honestly. He was probably just flexing, but with a body like that, I wouldn't wear a shirt again in my life. To this, the doctor clicked his tongue in envy, mumbling something about cocky bastard and how Che still pulled more baddies than he did, before switching back to the medical records. He revealed that Che's healing factor was probably the best he'd ever seen, even when compared to Kimyo's, whose talents specialized in healing. It was to the point that even his wisdom teeth, which had been removed years ago, had grown back. Truly remarkable. Che just smiled, refraining from commenting. Maybe it was because of how the talent was acquired that left him conflicted, but the strain in his smile made it obvious that things weren't exactly rosy. Picking up on this, Dr. Evan quickly changed the topic. He informed Che that his body was perfectly healthy, but caution was definitely needed. Although all his wounds had healed, his body still bore their scars, meaning there was a limit to his healing factor, even though it was ridiculously high. He advised Che to be careful and to stop by the clinic for regular checkups over the next 2 months to make sure everything stayed fine. Che replied that he would, then turned to the doctor, feeling like he still had more to say. Hesitating for a moment, the doctor finally repeated that Che should be careful. If possible, he shouldn't involve himself in strenuous activities until the exact details of his transformation were revealed, and that included clapping mad cheeks. He shouldn't overindulge in the buns and end up complicating things. Che replied that he'd be careful, but even a dog knew he was lying. That horny bastard was definitely going to marinate some cheeks the moment he walked out of that place. 1 week later, at the Chaguanas flyover, an otherwise peaceful day was suddenly thrown into disarray. Explosions lit up the streets, the handiwork of the infamous Kimyo villains, the Samal brothers. While laying waste to the freeway, they explained that their crime wasn't one of hate, but one of justice and passion. WASA, the Water and Sewage Authority, had constantly destroyed roads and cut off water supply, all for the sake of building their pipelines and maximizing their profits. They had no regard for public interest, always moving to line their pockets. Well, all that stopped now. They were determined to put an end to it. Rising up to confront them were Inspector Ian and the police, who told them to stop spewing nonsense. They were upset WASA was destroying roads, so their solution was to show up and destroy the road. What kind of bullshit was that? They'd better stop with that nonsense and go home. If they had complaints, they should take them to the Parliament reps. Then, without hesitation, the police opened fire, lighting up the Samal brothers with a hail of bullets. Regrettably, the foe's talents specialized in defense, making them invulnerable to bullets. They easily tanked that shit, even talking shit as they prepared a counterattack. With superhuman strength, one of the brothers grabbed a vehicle and tossed it at the police, causing a massive explosion on impact. The scene instantly descended into chaos, flames and explosions going off everywhere. In the midst of the carnage, no one noticed that a pair of silhouettes were quickly approaching the area. They moved like phantoms in the wind, closing in on the Samal brothers in an instant. Oblivious, the soon-to-be-cooked brothers continued their rampage, daring the police to do something. They shouted some red pill, escape the Matrix type shit, which honestly made sense. But the fact that their actions were the exact opposite of what they were preaching made it hilarious and stripped them of all credibility. Just as the brothers were done messing around and decided to end things, a truck suddenly came flying in, blitzing one of them to Kingdom Come. The change left the other brother flabbergasted, but he didn't have long to be shocked because a fireball was already racing toward him. Caught off guard, he had no choice but to eat the attack, bathing painfully in the torrent of flames. When the attack finally ended, the brothers could finally feast their eyes on who had attacked them. Who else could it be but Che and Tevin, striking a pose and seriously aura farming in their vigilante costumes. Smelling the smoke, the Samal brothers instantly activated their trump card, a fusion of essence and talent, merging into a four-armed behemoth. It exhibited the combined powers of the duo, amplifying their combat power by a shit-ton. Enter the ugly yet incredibly powerful Ultra Samal sign. Gazing nonchalantly at the transformed behemoth, Tevin dismissed it with undisguised contempt. He told Che he didn't have time for this shit and would rather get something to eat. Che replied that he was hungry as well, so they'd better wrap things up quickly. They agreed on a pincer attack, hit the enemy from both flanks. Meanwhile, as the duo prepared their battle plan, the onlooking policeman turned to Ian for orders. With how far things had flown off the rails, what were they supposed to do now? Ian replied that they should clear the area and retreat. This was no longer a battle they could interfere in. The best course of action was to prevent civilian casualties. While they were still mobilizing, the battle on the freeway had already kicked off. Che started things with a fire blast, clocking Ultra Samal in the face. Next was Tevin, who charged in for melee. Reacting quickly, Samal counterattacked with a punch of his own, meeting Tevin in a clash of fists. The force from their impact kicked up shockwaves, tearing apart the concrete beneath them. Capitalizing on Samal being tied up, Che intervened with another fireball, blasting the foe in the face. This created an opening for Tevin to slip away, only to reappear behind Samal and put the latter in a chokehold. With the enemy firmly restrained, Tevin shouted at Che to have at it. It was time to finish that shit. Che said bet, and channeled his power, coalescing it into a javelin of flame. With zero hesitation, and ignoring the Samal brothers' pleas to talk things out, he threw that bad boy, sending it hurtling toward the frantic duo. The attack struck true, blitzing the hell out of the Samal brothers. They went up in flames, soaking in the heat of a giant explosion. Eventually, when the flame cleared, the Samal brothers were already bound by restraints, pitiful and crying tears of regret. They promised to turn over a new leaf, but of course no one paid attention to that nonsense. All eyes were on the two vigilantes brazenly walking around. Picking up on this, Private Brandon Gale asked Ian for an explanation. Why weren't they arresting those two when Kimyos were clearly banned by law, ordered to be arrested on sight? Ian replied with a casual chuckle. Arrest them? Did they even have the ability to do so? And even if they did, why would he? They were clearly on their side. Mockingly chuckling, he told his assistant to let it go. As far as he was concerned, all the Kimyos in the area had been arrested. Then, as if he hadn't been talking about them at all, he bid the boys goodbye, thanking them for their help in the incident. The duo returned the sentiment and quickly disappeared, heading back to their lair, or to grab food and huzz as they'd originally planned. Switching scenes, we arrive at the great mansion of Elon Hemlock, Lewis's uncle. After arriving at the estate, the duo of part-time vigilantes said their hellos before talking about how crazy their day had been. They knew fighting crime was tough, but damn, they never thought it'd be that crazy. Elon replied with a proud chuckle. What did they expect? The whole country had lost its mind. Besides, did they really think becoming famous vigilantes to pull bitches would be easy? They'd better lock in if they wanted to lock in some cheeks. Nodding, Che agreed with the geezer before addressing Louis. He asked how the search for Rokash was going. Did he have any luck? Louis replied that he did have something to share, but he'd fill Che in on that later. For now, they should be more worried about the Kimyo ban, since it was seriously hampering their work. And the ban wasn't the only thing, they also had their new sensei to deal with. At this rate, they were going to die. Che agreed, mentioning that he'd seen Anton training on their way in. The dude seemed exhausted, like he could pass out at any moment. Sighing helplessly, Louis shifted the topic to the bands on Che's arm, power regulators, and asked if they were working. Che replied that they were. In fact, he'd been able to keep the Ilios power in check because of them. No civilians were hurt when he used his power, so he guessed the regulators were doing a damn good job. While the duo were chopping it up, a third party cut into their conversation, pointing out that Che and Tevin had made it into the news again. But aside from that, Che's fire javelin was sloppy as fuck. She wondered how the damn thing hadn't exploded in his face. The speaker was Andrea, the same fine mommy who'd shown up a couple of videos ago, and damn, she was smoking. Just look at all that thickness, cheeks so soft they're practically falling off the bone. Thank you to the artist for doing the Lord's work. Ignoring the fine shit before his eyes, Che was more concerned about the diss to his javelin skill. He argued that the skill wasn't trash at all, but a genuine work of art. Andrea almost died laughing, saying that shit was garbage. It was a miracle it hadn't blown up in his face. Defeated, Che sulked. He'd lost that battle, but what he didn't know was that he'd won the war. Andrea was giggling coquettishly, showing that she had a crush on Che. And even if she didn't, we all know what they say. If you can make her giggle, then her cheeks will surely jiggle. Wise words from the sage, the esteemed Johnny Sins. Fast forward to dusk. While Che was leaving the mansion, he was stopped by Andrea and her thick thighs. She said something about the mansion being the only Japanese-style architecture in Trinidad, deserving to be a tourist attraction. But honestly, I was too busy zooming in on the thighs to pay attention. Che, on the other hand, wasn't as thirsty as I was, so he actually heard Andrea's words. He replied that although it would be an honor for the Hemlock family, it wasn't a good idea to turn the mansion into a museum, especially since there was a Kimyo ban, and they were literally hiding there. Andrea clicked her tongue at his sarcasm before continuing her banter. She revealed that the Hemlock family had a bloodline talent, Ash of the Fathers, and it would only be transferred to the first son of every generation, a true noble family indeed. Che smiled bitterly in response, partly out of envy and partly out of longing. It was clear he felt some type of way about it. Picking up on this, Andrea asked what was on his mind. Was he perhaps going back there again? If so, then she was sure she would be beyond happy seeing him, referring to another she. Che sighed, put on his best fake smile, and quietly left the mansion behind. When he next appeared, he was at the West Coast Orphanage. Walking up to the reception desk, he greeted the receptionist with gentle familiarity. Surprised, she blurted out his name before realizing her mistake and covering her mouth. With the ban on Kimyos, it wasn't safe to yell out his name like that. Regaining her composure, she informed him that the patient had been looking for him. In fact, she'd asked about him every single day since his last visit. Che thanked her for the information and quickly walked up the stairs. He was eager to see her, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he might endanger her by being there. Shaking off the negative thoughts, he knocked on the door, announcing that it was him. Before he could apologize for showing up without calling, a figure suddenly flew out of the room and wrapped him in a big hug. Overwhelmed and choking with tears, she excitedly called him brother. Fast forward a couple of minutes later, and the two siblings are chopping it up in the room. Che, as the older brother, goes through his sister's grades, and what he sees surprises him. Straight A's. The little lady was doing so well in school you'd think she was cheating or something. But no, that was pure big brain energy. She'd inherited all the brains in the family, leaving Che with barely any to rely on. Stupid muscle brain bastard. Swallowing the grievance of being dumb, Che asked his sister what she wanted as a reward. Since she was killing it in her grades, he might as well reward her for it. Smirking, Yukiko replied that she wanted to visit her uncles, Tevin and the gang. When she scored first place in her exams again, she wanted Che to take her to them. Che smiled and readily agreed. The reward wasn't excessive, and he could easily make it happen. Sealing a pinky promise, he assured Yukiko he'd come through on his word. To this, Yukiko beamed before pouting and frowning. She hadn't forgotten that Che hadn't visited her in days. Not only that, the scars on his body seemed to be increasing lately, meaning he was out there being reckless. Although she understood he was fighting to make money to afford her stay at that place, she couldn't help but worry about him. Che picked up on her concerns and reassured her. He was doing fine, so she didn't have to worry. Matter of fact, he was strong as hell now, so her concerns were unnecessary. But that aside, she should really focus on being a kid. Brush her teeth, do her homework, crush on little boys. She should leave all the grown-up thoughts to the grown-ups. Smiling, Yukiko gave him a big hug and replied that she'd try, but in exchange he had to promise to visit her more often. Che readily agreed, telling her to say less. As for the crushing on boys part, he was obviously joking. She was prohibited from speaking to, let alone breathing next to, those horny dogs. Matter of fact, her first date should be when she's 70 years old because, fuck them horny kids. Back at the Hemlock Mansion, an interesting scene was playing out on the training ground. And no, it wasn't a fight or anything like that, but the showcase of cheeks of mass destruction by the baddie Andrea swaying her seductive plot. The muscle mommy told the boys the moment they'd been waiting for had finally arrived. If they could impress her or move her in any way, she'd reveal her talent to them and show them what was hidden in the bag. However, they shouldn't think it would be an easy feat. She was the granddaughter of the one and only Leo Thomas after all. Plus, look at all that waifu cargo. Did they really think it would be easy to move her? Ignoring the boys' flushed faces, she called the first participant to the stage, Tevin. He accepted the challenge and confidently walked forward, then with zero hesitation activated his Kimyo talent, Hide Forge, a transformation-type talent. Dense energy blanketed the area, retreating to reveal Tevin in his new form, the Rhino Hide form. Impressed, Andrea grinned in acknowledgement and gave the hide another look over. She'd never thought it was possible to upgrade a Kimyo talent, yet here Tevin was, having done just that. Not only had he eliminated his previous weaknesses, he'd also acquired 2 more transformations to his Hide Forge, making the total 3, namely Rhino, Lion, and Blacksmith. Tevin explained that each hide had its own quirks and perks. The Rhino hide, although the weakest, relied on oxygen to function, making it virtually limitless, and because of that, it was his current default hide. Next was the Lion hide. It maxed out on offense at the expense of defense, meaning it had 0 defensive value, but on the bright side, its offensive might was truly formidable. With his current strength, he could only activate it for 20 seconds since the hide ran on stamina, unlike the Rhino hide which ran on oxygen. Last was the Blacksmith hide. It could be considered a combination of the Rhino and Lion hides, a true powerhouse indeed. However, the disadvantages were equally severe. The hide ran on blood, making its use perilous. In fact, the last time he tried it, he'd almost killed himself. His heart stopped. But even with that, he couldn't live in fear forever. He was determined to activate it today and show them why he was the best tank on the team. With that said, he let his aura loose, beginning his transformation. Dense energy blanketed the area, followed by mana storms and a primal aura. The majesty of the King of the Jungle pressed down on everyone, making them feel like kneeling in submission. But just as the aura was about to become overwhelming, it suddenly stopped and receded immediately. What was left in its place was a spent Tevin, looking stupid and even farting from the strain. Damn, this dude will never pull bitches again. Shaking off the embarrassment, Tevin quickly left the stage to Che. Stepping forward, Che immediately called upon his latest creation, a Kimyo, the Javelin of Flames. Since everyone was already familiar with its long-range capabilities, Che opted to showcase its short-range prowess. He activated the dummy mechanism of the training ground, planning to use close-quarters melee to impress the thick Andrea. With 0 wasted movements, he charged forward, slicing the first dummy in 2. Then, with an effortless shift of his body, he weaved through the remaining dummies, dicing through them with ease. When the last dummy fell, he reversed his grip on a Kimyo, planning to end things with a bang. Under Andrea's heated gaze, he spun the spear like a top before yeeting it at the target. The spear raced through the air, striking true on the bullseye. And although it didn't end with a flashy explosion, it still did well enough to garner Andrea's attention. Next up was Azam the Speedster. After ascending the stage, he also activated the dummy function of the arena. With numerous targets surrounding him, the budget Barry Allen immediately went to work. He became a blur of movement, darting between the targets. Everywhere his silhouette passed, dummies fell, crushed to bits by his martial techniques and Bruce Lee-style nunchucks. Done with his demonstration, he left the arena to Louis. As the Sword Eyebrow was stepping onto the stage, the rest of the gang shouted at him to clutch that win. No matter what happened there today, they had to see the contents of that mysterious bag. Smirking, Andrea called out to the boys. Donning her most seductive face, she bit her lip and encouraged them to give it their all. If they played their cards right, she'd open it all for them. As for what she was going to open, I'll leave that to your imagination, you horny dog. As expected, the boys immediately lost their shit. Their noses bled like crazy, making me wonder how they hadn't passed out from all that blood loss. Picking up on this, Andrea ignored the perverts and shifted her attention to Louis. She was particularly interested in witnessing the Hemlock family talent in action. Her grandfather, Leo Thomas, always had good things to say about it, calling it the most creative. Thus, she was eager to see if the talent was really worth the hype. Louis said bet and stepped forward. He unleashed his Kimyo talent, stunning Andrea with its majesty. The once harmless Ash had undergone a dramatic transformation, morphing into a hydra of cruel savagery. Deactivating the talent, he leisurely stepped off the hydra, aura farming all the way to the ground. When he arrived, he was met with Andrea's approving gaze. She was, to say the least, surprised by the prowess the boys had shown thus far. She hadn't thought they would be capable of such growth in the short time she'd been teaching them. However, this much was still not enough. If they wanted to know her talent, let alone take a peek into her mystery bag, they'd have to do way more than that. Hearing this, the last on stage, Anton, called her mean. If she didn't want to show her mystery bag, could she at least let them cop a feel of the cheeks? How else were they supposed to retain their interest in training after all? Ignoring him, Andrea asked what he could do. He'd been weirdly low-key in the story thus far. Che replied that Anton's talent was a bit special. It was essentially a two-in-one type of talent. The first part, or the passive part, was one she was already familiar with. Anton could create unbreakable rods. But the second part was more special. It was a shift-type talent, and what made it more unique was that the shift talent also had its own talent. The rods. Basically a talent within a talent. A two-for-one deal for all those who still didn't understand. What Anton was going to show next was his second talent, the shift talent. Speaking of Anton, he had already started his demonstration. He activated his beast shift, calling upon Kong at 30%. Dense dust storms billowed, blocking all visibility. When the dust settled, a crouched Anton was seen. But this time, something was different. He'd grown a tail. Not only that, half of his face had become beast-like, resembling the great sage, Heaven's equal, the one and only Monkey King, Sun Wukong. This was precisely Anton's talent, an ancient beast shift who possessed his own talent, Kong. Impressed, although only barely, Andrea praised the boys for their improvement. They'd definitely done a great job to come that far. However, it was still not enough. Their enemy Rokash was a tough nut to crack, a Kimyo ranked 87th in the tier list. If they wanted to defeat him, then they had to get stronger, way stronger than they currently were. With that said, she turned to leave. The boys hadn't measured up to her expectations, so she wouldn't be telling them shit about her talent, nor would she be revealing the contents of her bag. If they wanted to view both, and possibly her cheeks as well, then they had to work harder. That night, in a signal tower overlooking the Hemlock Mansion, we're shown a glimpse of the forces stirring in the shadows. One of them, assumed to be the master and mastermind, spied on the Hemlock estate as he talked to his assistant on the phone. Concerned, the assistant asked why they hadn't attacked already. If they continued waiting longer, things might take an unfavorable turn. The master, however, wasn't in a hurry to act. He told his assistant, Kagaya, to relax. They had all the time in the world. For now, they should let Andrea groom them, make them stronger, and when the time came, they'd deal the fatal blow. They'd crush them like the ants they were and take back what was stolen from them, what was rightfully theirs. As for whether things would blow up in their faces, how could that be possible? All the great villains always give the MC time to grow, and it always works out in the villain's favor. When had that brilliant strategy ever failed? Just look at Luffy and Katakuri, Ichigo and Aizen, prime examples of the MC getting clapped. Nothing could go wrong. Genius strategy and villain death flags aside, we shift to the junkyard where some intense action is underway. With a mighty explosion, several figures are blasted out of the dust cloud, crashing pathetically into the pile of junk and rubble. The first one was a Cable-looking bastard who had most of his body curved up. Kinda like the real Cable would have been if he'd fought Poppy Logan instead of bitch-ass Deadpool in the movie. The second was a budget Hawkgirl wannabe, obviously lacking the jerk-sesh allure the real one had. As for the last one, this bastard was mysterious to say the least. He looked like a cyborg monk while at the same time resembling a dumpling, making his features truly bizarre. Not to mention he was packing some serious heat, which made me wonder if he'd just blast people if they refused to accept the ways of Buddha. Truly a unique sight. Fighting them was a figure we've all grown to know and hate, the one and only Rokash Ramperstad. Grinning widely, the bastard Kimyo closed in on the trio, forgetting he was butt-ass naked. He flexed his chiseled muscles, telling the assailants to forgive his rudeness. It wasn't his intention to manhandle them so roughly. He hadn't received visitors in a while, so his animalistic instincts got the better of him. Blushing, the Hawkgirl wannabe told him to shut his mouth. What animalistic instincts? He was just a pervert flashing his private parts, but god damn it, couldn't he put some clothes on? Fighting him while his dangling bits swung around like that was really distracting. Rokash replied that it wasn't his fault. They'd attacked him in the middle of a sacred and serious jerk ritual. But that aside, who were they exactly? And how had they found him? The junkyard he was hiding in had been abandoned for years, so he doubted they'd just stumbled into it. They definitely came in search of him. But how had they known he was there? He had so many questions, and he would pry the answers from their lips whether they liked it or not. As for how he'd do that, well, he'd simply introduce them to his little friend, Anu Ankh, his talent. He said this while biting his lips seductively, making me wonder whether he wanted to introduce them to something other than his talent, considering he was butt naked, things still swinging about. Meanwhile, as Rokash was threatening the trio with his talent and possibly his Johnson of mass destruction, a duo of onlookers were watching the fun from a mile away. One of them was the same sword dude from before, while beside him was his aide, a man in a mask constantly wondering if they should have sent more men. To this, the demon-looking bastard told him there was no need. No amount of pawns could possibly bring down Rokash. Their mission goal was to test the strength of their pawns, and who better than the Egyptian Kimyo himself, Rokash, to do it. Speaking of Rokash, the siege on him had resumed in earnest. Leading the charge was the Hawk Girl wannabe, who unleashed her blades and charged in for melee. Unfortunately, she barely had time to shine before she was blitzed instantly, losing half her body in a ranged attack by Rokash. Advancing, he grabbed her remaining wing and yanked her from the air, slamming the big bird into the ground. Terrified, Hawkgirl attempted to beg for mercy, even promising to let him rub his face on her chiseled abs. Regrettably, Rokash wasn't a simp, so he quickly moved in for the finisher. Lifting his leg, he stomped on Hawkgirl's face, bursting her head like a watermelon. Then, with a grin that could send shivers down anyone's spine, he turned to face the other assailants, daring them to make a move. Enraged by the taunt, the cyborg monk lunged in for a smash attack. Swinging his giant mallet in a crushing blow, he aimed it at Rokash, but the nude villain was way too nimble, dodging the attack with an effortless leap. The only downside was that his cheeks were wide open, giving a clear view of things no one asked for. But since I'm your boy, I'll gladly blur out the details so you won't have to suffer the same trauma I just did. As for the cybermonk, he wasn't keen on letting Rokash escape so easily. He quickly activated his Kimyo talent, generating a powerful attraction force that locked onto Rokash, pulling him toward the giant mallet waiting in ambush. But even with that, the nude Rokash was still too formidable, breaking free from the force and dodging the downward swing with a graceful backstep. Then, as if he was toying with his foe, he leapt over the next attack, making sure to position his exposed cheeks right in the monk's face. Enraged, the cybermonk said, "Fuck melee," and pulled out the heat. He emptied an entire clip on Rokash, but as usual, the crazy Kimyo dodged that shit, even making a spectacle of breezing through a particularly threatening shot. Then, as if recreating a meme, he hit him with the Omai wa mo Shinderu, blitzing him to death before he could even realize it. Advancing, he activated his Anu Ankh impulse, tapping the monk's tummy for the decisive finisher. Blood and entrails blustered out, marking the official end of the battle. While that was going on, Rokash's reinforcements finally arrived on the scene. And just like the assaulting foes before them, they asked why Rokash was naked. Did he have a fetish for showing cheeks while fighting? What was going on? Rokash gave the same excuse. It wasn't his fault. They'd attacked him in the middle of a shower and possible jerk sesh. What did they expect him to do? But that aside, shouldn't they handle the last vermin before sorting this shit out? It's not like his cheeks were going anywhere. Agreeing, the trio of villains turned towards the last survivor, Budget Cable. Closing in, they asked how he'd found them. They were sure it wasn't a coincidence, so he better not lie. Chuckling, Cable told them to piss off. He had no intention of surrendering. On the contrary, with death so close, he vowed to take the whole lot down with him. Activating his trump card, he yelled for the three bastards to join him in hell before detonating a massive explosion, blanketing the sky in smoke. Watching from the sidelines, the two onlookers shook their heads in disappointment. They'd hoped the pawns would draw out more of Rokash's power, but all they managed to do was get toyed with. Moving on from the dissatisfying display, the main villain instructed his assistant, Kagaya, to test the boys next. It was about time they knew just how strong they were. However, he emphasized caution, because although presumed weak, they were still led by the Sunfire's kin, Che motherfucking Heart. Meanwhile, back on the battlefield, the last of the smoke finally cleared, revealing an orb in the middle. The orb was a Kimyo ability, the very same they'd relied on to survive the catastrophic explosion. Emerging from the shield, the trio couldn't help but click their tongues in annoyance, wondering where the hell that attack had come from. It would have wiped them out, if not for the quick reaction of the lead goon. Analyzing the charred remnants, Beanie Boy shared that the explosion was a photon blast, which didn't make sense considering such technology shouldn't exist at this time. It only served to highlight the significance of the matter, because their enemy seemed capable of remarkable feats while striking from the shadows. A truly formidable foe indeed. Nonchalant, Rokash brushed the concerns aside. If the enemy was really that strong, then why did they feel the need to hide in the shadows like a coward instead of attacking directly? As far as he was concerned, such people weren't worth worrying about. As for who he thought it was, his best guess was Putin. Only that Psycho would do something so crazy. Shifting scenes, were taken back to Hemlock Mansion. A heavy pressure hung in the air as the gang watched the latest breaking news report. A terrorist attack on the city. Several lives were lost, coupled with millions in damages to property and businesses. And the ones responsible for this massacre were a group of cybernetic Kimyos who showed up out of nowhere and began laying waste to everything and everyone in their way. The current death toll had already reached 38, with numbers expected to rise by the end of the massacre. Watching the report, the gang couldn't help but shed tears, lamenting how merciless the perpetrators were. Among the dead were women and children, making them wonder if it was really necessary to go that far. Nevertheless, the deed was already done, so moping around wouldn't get them anywhere, nor would it avenge the dead. It was time to make some moves. Amidst the gloom, no one noticed the odd change in Che's demeanor, as if he was holding back something grave. The change came and went too fast for anyone to notice, and even if they did, they'd probably assume it was just shock from the report. However, it wasn't shock. Something was growing in Che, and by the time they figured it out, it would already be too late. Switching to the baddie Andrea, she suggested helping the military. With a bunch of crazy cybernetic Kimyos rampaging around, it was clear the military wouldn't be able to handle them on their own. Tevin supported the idea, but proposed they stay low-key about it. There was still a ban on Kimyos after all. Andrea agreed, and immediately divided the group. She assigned Che, Louise, and Anton to a single unit, tasking them with contacting Inspector Ian and offering their assistance. As for the rest, they'd be part of her squad, sweeping through the city and flattening out any villains who dared show up before them. Chiming in, Che asked about the perpetrators. Who or what exactly were they? Azam replied that no one was sure, but from frontline reports, they were termed Kimyo cyborgs. Their bodies were augmented with cutting-edge cybernetics, making the term fitting. Releasing an intense killing intent, Che replied that that bit of information was more than enough for him. He didn't need to know everything about the vermin he would kill. As he said this, his eyes burned with flames, surprising Tevin, who had been watching him closely. Concerned, Tevin's face changed drastically. He felt something was gravely wrong with Che. As for what it was, and what it meant for their future, he didn't know. But there was only one way to find out. They'd have to live through that shit and see what happens. Fast forward to the next day at the Republic Bank. The seemingly ordinary, boring day suddenly took a dramatic turn when the entrance was blown open, surprising everyone in the building, especially the thick mommy currently being served. When the dust cleared, the culprit behind the chaos was revealed. And believe it or not, she too was a thick mommy, albeit with more mechanical charm and BBL as opposed to the natural Nubian queen from before. Grinning maliciously, the cyborg baddie greeted everyone before jesting that she'd come to make a withdrawal. Of course, the withdrawal wasn't for money but for lives, specifically Kimyo lives, since she'd smelled the blood of one in the building. Wasting no time, she immediately began her offensive, sending her prosthetic arms shooting toward the Kimyo in question. The one and only, supernatural, super milfy, thicker than nobody's business, beautiful S-rank Kimyo, Farah Ree. Due to the sudden sneak attack, Ree barely had time to react before the strike landed, clocking her in the arm. The force from the impact nailed her to the ground, leaving her vulnerable to the villain's next move. But even then, she didn't panic. She quickly suppressed the pain and locked in, calling upon her own Kimyo talent to retaliate. As for her talent, think of it as the love child of Kimimaro and Bakugo. On one end, she could manipulate her bones at will, extracting them, shaping them, weaponizing them, and on the other end, she could manipulate their temperature, turning them into mini explosions that slice through everything with ease. Using this formidable combination, she diced through the arm holding her in place, freeing herself and officially beginning her counterattack. With a fierce face of defiance, she told the Kimyo foe to come at her, promising that taking her down wouldn't be as easy as she'd imagined. To this, the foe grinned widely, calling bullshit on her declaration. Even if Ri was 10 times stronger, 10 times prettier, and, most importantly, 10 times thicker, goddamn. She still believed taking her down would be as easy as baking pie. Without hesitation, she resumed her offensive, unleashing a barrage of attacks. Ri countered with finesse, parrying what she could and dodging the rest. In a brief moment of opportunity, she threw her bone projectiles like shurikens, hoping to tag the foe. Unfortunately, the enemy wasn't kidding when she said her thickness didn't matter. Sorry, I meant strength. Don't be deceived, thickness will always matter. She easily caught Ri's attacks, proving she hadn't been bluffing when she dismissed Ri's power. Then, as if wanting to drive the point home, she lunged at the hero, plunging the battle into a brutal, bloody melee. Fast forward a couple hours later, and the outcome of the battle was finally confirmed. Amidst a flood of blood and mangled corpses, the police, who always show up fashionably late, finally arrived at the premises. As they entered the bank, the leader, Inspector Ian, visibly frowned as he asked his assistant Brandon for the status report. How many casualties were they looking at? Brandon replied that the confirmed number was 21. 13 civilians and 8 law enforcement officers unlucky enough to be caught up in the mess. What was strange, however, was that the vault didn't have a scratch on it. Had the villain not gotten the chance to attack it? Or was the vault never part of her plan to begin with? If so, what was she really after? Brushing the thought aside, he gestured toward a corpse on the ground, identifying it as Farah Rees, her fate after facing off against the unknown cyborg attacker. Ian exclaimed in shock. To think they'd lose a valuable S-rank Kimyo to such a random event. It was a shame things went down that way. Deep down, though, he wondered why Ri risked her life in such a hopeless fight. If it were up to him, he'd have preferred she abandoned everyone and escaped. A living Farah Ri was infinitely more useful than a dead one. How were they supposed to deal with troublesome villainous Kimyos now? Before, they could just call Ri for help. But now, what were they going to do? As he thought this, a trio of footsteps echoed behind them, growing closer. The familiar faces of Che and the boys appeared. They had finally arrived to offer assistance. Delighted, Ian welcomed them enthusiastically. He'd just been stressing about who would replace Ri when the trio showed up. Wasn't this basically good fortune knocking on his door? Directing the boys to the villain, he told them to take a look, noting that she'd taken down one of their own, the S-rank Kimyo Farah Ri. Surprised, Che asked if he was serious. Had the powerful Ri really fallen to this vermin? If so, then it was truly a shame. She was known as a symbol of justice and valor among the people, always protecting the weak and standing against the strong. And now that symbol was gone, lost in the river of time. Ian replied that she wouldn't be forgotten. He would remember her. Not only that, he'd make sure to avenge her. As he said this, he gestured toward the captured cyborg baddie pinned to the wall, obviously Ri's doing before she finally bit the dust. Switching scenes, were taken back to the Hemlock Mansion, specifically to Tevin flexing on a bunch of kids. Due to the recent chaos in the city, every able-bodied person had been called to assist, leaving those with children scrambling to protect them. Predicting this, Louise's uncle had offered his mansion as a temporary daycare. Andrea was delighted. She was all for preserving children's innocence. No matter the chaos in the world, children had the right to remain children, playing and enjoying themselves to their heart's content. Meanwhile, back at the bank, the atmosphere was far from lively or optimistic. Despite being interrogated repeatedly and threatened with a fate worse than death, the captured Kimyos still refused to talk, grinning mockingly at the gang. Fed up, Louise told her to cut the bullshit. 25 officers with rifles and a powerful S-rank Kimyo had come at her, yet she not only survived, she counter-killed them. How was that possible? Gloating, the cyborg baddie said she'd talk, not because she was giving up, but because he was a handsome poppy, and she liked handsome poppies with blue eyes, so why not tell him? She confessed that her main Kimyo talent was foresight. By making eye contact with someone, she could see both their immediate and distant futures, making winning against her close to impossible. How do you beat someone who can literally predict all your moves, present and future? Surprised, both Che and Anton asked what she meant by main. Did she have more than one ability? Louise ignored the banter and stepped closer. With a face that screamed, "Try me. I'll actually kill you," he told her to think carefully. Since she could see the future, she must already know what he'd do to her if she insisted on not cooperating. To save everyone time, wouldn't it be better if she just talked? Grinning, the cyborg baddie said she didn't mind. She liked things rough, so she'd gladly play with him if he'd play with her. But threats aside, he clearly didn't understand the extent of her power. He couldn't threaten her. She already knew everything about his future, including how he would die. And damn, it was a painful one. The same was true for the rest of his gang. None of them could scare her. They should save their breath and piss off. As she said this, her gaze involuntarily flicked to Che, and her ability automatically activated. Her vision went dark. When she regained her senses, she found herself in a city of flames and calamity. Everything around her was in ruin, burning and withering away under the intense heat. But the most bizarre thing amidst the chaos was the figure standing in the flames completely unaffected. Focusing on the figure, the cyborg Kimyo realized it was a face she recognized, though slightly different from the one she'd seen seconds ago. This one was more poppy, covered in battle scars with a domineering aura to match. Unfortunately, the cyborg baddie was truly foolish. She ignored all the obvious danger signs and marched right up to him, yelling at him to take her back. She didn't know what he'd done to bring her here, but he better send her back before she got all domestic violence on his ass. Didn't he see her thickness? She was clearly Latina, the last person he'd want to mess with. She was mucho loco for real. The figure, future Che, gave her a sideways glance like, "Bitch, please." He'd been dealing with Nubian baddies his whole life. Did she really think she could shake him? Besides, couldn't she see how cool he looked right now? Would someone this poppy really be threatened by the likes of her? He gave her one last look, clearly saying, "Be gone, thought. Thou shalt not interrupt my sauce." Back in the bank, the cyborg Kimyo started losing her mind. After seeing the calamity that was future Che and the destruction he would cause, she didn't want him anywhere near her. Whenever he approached, she'd start screaming at him to back the fuck up. Confused, the gang realized getting anything useful from her would be pointless. If they wanted to figure out how she had more than one ability, they needed another method. Hearing this, Anton decided to give it a try. He called upon his talent, the great sage who claimed to know everything, Kong. Upon being summoned, the great sage took exactly 1 second before flipping out. He attacked Anton, demanding who gave him the guts to summon him. Didn't he know he hated his guts? Seemingly used to this, Anton took it in stride. He calmly addressed Kong, asking him to answer their questions if he knew the answers. Sighing, Kong called them foolish before explaining. The phenomenon within the cyborg baddie's body was the result of a forced talent transfer. Initially, she only had one ability, but due to the forced transfer, she'd gained 2 more, giving her a total of 3 abilities. Alarmed, Inspector Ian paled at the implications. Forced talent transfers weren't just illegal, they were fatal. Every such act resulted in the death of the Kimyo being plundered, meaning there were 2 innocent Kimyos who'd lost their lives for this woman to become what she was. And if he thought further, and if this was true for all the cyborg Kimyos attacking the city, then the number of innocent casualties was astronomical. Meanwhile, back at the Hemlock Mansion, the once peaceful day was about to be ruined. Arriving on the scene was the villain Kagaya, accompanied by a towering giant, clearly a Kimyo as well. Introducing himself, Kagaya stated that they were villains and had come to fuck shit up. Hemlock drew his blade, telling them to come at him. If they thought they could swagger into his home and do as they pleased, they were gravely mistaken. The villains responded by stepping closer. They came here because they wanted smoke. Did Hemlock really think he could scare them off with some words? Hell no. They were about that life for real. Saying so, the giant Kimyo's eye shined crimson, marking the start of the battle. At the same time, on another side of the mansion, the squad heard the commotion and immediately moved. They ignored the looming foes and focused on evacuating the children. Unfortunately, the villains weren't going to let that happen. They launched 3 missiles toward the kids. Reacting quickly, Tevin stepped in. He activated his lion hide, using his sharp claws to dice through the missiles. When the smoke cleared, he low-key praised himself for his quick thinking. If he'd opted for rhino hide, he would have tanked the explosion, but the shockwave alone would have decimated the kids. Luckily, lion hide let him destroy the missiles before detonation. Off to the side, Andrea and Azam watched the scene in worry, then relief. Worry because things looked grim. Relief because with Tevin protecting them, they didn't have to fear for the kids, at least for now. Even so, they understood it would be up to them to fend off the attackers while Tevin focused on protecting the children. With that in mind, Andrea called out to Azam for a favor. She told him to create an opening and run to her room. There was something she needed him to retrieve: her red bag. In other words, she needed her loadout. Azam said bet and focused once again on the fight. At the same time, Kagaya ignored their little side banter and confidently found a place to rest. He knew his great general, giant Papi Grimdora, would get the job done, so he casually sat back to watch the show, or rather, the ass-clapping. Speaking of Grimdora, he finally locked in, removing the cloak wrapped around his body. This exposed his true appearance, and I gotta say, I genuinely don't know what to compare this freak to. Legs like a thick-ass sumo wrestler, a neck so vascular you might think he snots pebbles for fun, and finally a hat that either resembled a goblin's hat or an OG fighter jet helmet. Either way, this dude was a walking mash of bizarre. But he was kinda thick though, so I guess it's alright. Pause. Facing off against General Thick Thighs was the duo of Azam and Andrea, who didn't hesitate to tag team him. Azam struck low while Andrea attacked from above, landing a nasty axe kick on Grimdora. Coincidentally, she also had thick thighs, so the conquest quickly became a contest of thickness. Of course, Andrea won, because who in their right mind would choose this ghoulish creature over the Nubian queen with divine thighs like our muscle mommy Andrea? Jokes aside, Grimdora acknowledged Andrea's strength, vowing to fight her seriously before the scene shifted to Ian and his team. They were currently in a surveillance van, scouring the streets for the cyborg vigilantes who'd been causing mayhem lately. One of the men, in charge of compiling eyewitness reports, shared that based on the info they'd gathered, the team of vigilantes called themselves Titans. Another chimed in, saying the vigilantes' attacks were coordinated as fuck. Every attack was perfectly timed at 7-minute intervals, meaning they knew exactly what they were doing. Matter of fact, it almost seemed like they were trying to send a message. Ian frowned and asked about their progress in capturing them. Had they at least apprehended even one? And if they had, were any of them talking? A squad member replied that they hadn't captured shit. The attacks were so unexpected and so spread out that they couldn't catch any of them even if they tried. In fact, it was already a miracle they hadn't run out of personnel, given how thin they were stretching their resources. Another maiden chimed in, saying she had something to share. But honestly, if it isn't a complaint about her makeup artist, then her priorities are seriously messed up, because what the hell is this shit? On a positive note, her lineup is pretty crispy, so I guess there's that. Let's just hope she's thick as well, because having that hairstyle and no cheeks to match it is a crime against humanity. Locking in, Inspector Ian told her to ignore the narrator's bullshit and give her report. Female Mike Tyson replied that this wasn't a normal bank robbery. The assailant had ignored everything and everyone and headed straight for Ms. Ree. It was almost as if they were only concerned about her and nobody else. Che chimed in, saying he'd done some hood investigating and came to the same conclusion. The bank had been emptied yesterday, with new funds expected to arrive later that day, meaning even if the attack had been to rob the bank, there was nothing in the vault to steal. Louise, the big brain of the team, quickly deduced that the attack had nothing to do with money. A team as resourceful and organized as the Titans wouldn't make a clumsy mistake like robbing an empty bank. Their target must have been something else, or rather, someone else, and that someone was the lovely and now deceased Farah, Nubian Queen, Ree. Meanwhile, Back at the Hemlock Mansion, the battle against Grimdora continued. Despite being a 2-versus-1 fight, the duo of allies found it hard to compete. They barely held their own, risking serious injury just to keep Grimdora at bay. After landing a heavy punch, one capable of denting Grimdora's thick armor, Andrea clicked her tongue in annoyance, wondering just how sturdy the bastard was. But before she could get lost in her thoughts, or show more of that thickness and movement back there, goddamn, Grimdora pulled a move that caught her completely off guard. He whipped out a hidden chain whip and lashed it at her. Under Tevin's urgent reminder and a bit of luck on her part, she barely managed to sidestep the attack, dodging it by a hair's breadth. Even still, the sheer destruction the whip caused made her realize just how perilous their situation was. Not relenting, Grimdora swung his whip again, forcing Andrea to limbo the shit out of it. She counterattacked with a high kick, sending the whip flying back. Having bought herself some breathing room, she turned to Azam with urgency, telling him to get a move on. She really needed her red bag. Azam said bet, dodged below a particularly dangerous attack, and made a beeline toward Andrea's room. He didn't know what he'd find in there, probably some late-night jerk equipment. But that was for the pervy narrator to worry about, not him. Switching scenes, we're taken back to Ian and his crew. They were still racking their brains trying to figure out why someone would target Farah Ree. Anton commented that it made no sense. Why would anyone risk their lives to go after such a formidable Kimyo with an equally impressive arsenal? Louise chimed in, saying the risk-to-reward ratio wasn't worth it at all. Why risk your life and get nothing in return? While they were still pondering, another agent, predictably thick as well, reported that a team at another location had shared a report. A new Titan had shown up and killed yet another high-profile Kimyo. Hearing this, Che suddenly realized something and took off running. With a grave tone, he shouted that they'd been wrong. The Titan attacks weren't just coordinated, they were deliberate. They'd attacked those locations precisely to split them up. From the beginning, their plan had been to divide and conquer, isolate lone high-profile Kimyos, and take them out. In other words, the Titans were hunting Kimyos. Back at the Hemlock Mansion, Azam finally made his way to Andrea's room. Remembering the weird shit the narrator said about girls' rooms and jerk rituals, he hesitated. He was just a poor virgin who hadn't even entered a girl's room before. What if he saw something he shouldn't? But soon he manned the hell up and walked in anyway, spotting Andrea's bag in the corner. Without hesitation, he reached out to grab it, only to be hit with an unexpected surprise. The bag was heavy as fuck. It weighed well over 200 pounds, crashing into the ground the moment he lifted it. Surprised, Azam realized just how much of a muscle Mommy Andrea really was to be carrying this thing around like it was nothing. But still, how did she expect him to carry it? The bag was truly heavy as fuck. Speaking of Andrea, she was still holding her own against Grimdora. After dodging another whip attack, she countered with a right hook, sending it flying. But to her surprise, Grimdora didn't press the attack. Instead, he targeted Tevin and the kids, firing 2 rockets straight at them. Acting fast, Tevin rushed forward to intercept. He slashed through them with his sharp claws, making quick work of the explosives. Even then, the shockwave from the detonation hit him hard, making him wince in discomfort. Realizing things couldn't continue like this, he shouted a warning to Andrea, telling her he wouldn't be able to keep it up for long. Pause. Andrea said bet and engaged Grimdora in melee. Although she didn't quite like the choice of words Tevin used, she had to admit things couldn't continue like this. With that in mind, she backpedaled, hoping to come up with a new strategy. Unfortunately, Grimdora wasn't keen on letting her think. He switched up his attack style, widening his mouth to charge a breath attack. Under Andrea's incredulous gaze, he unleashed a laser beam, tearing apart the ground. When the dust finally cleared, the full extent of the damage was revealed. Pure carnage. The training grounds were set ablaze, flames spreading to nearby buildings. As for Andrea, she barely escaped with her life, and it was clear she wasn't in great shape. Just as things were looking more and more dire, Azam finally arrived with the bag. Calling out to Andrea, he shouted that he'd brought what she desired, and if she wanted to reward him, he wouldn't mind copping a feel of those cheeks. Without further ado, he activated his talent to the fullest, shoulder-bashing the hell out of the bag and sending it flying toward her. Grinning, the Nubian baddie thanked him profusely before locking the fuck in. She raised her muscle mommy legs and stomped hard on the incoming bag. Confused, Grimdora asked what she was so happy about. It was just a bag. It wasn't like it could win the fight for her. She was still going to get clapped. In response, Andrea smiled even wider. She told Grimdora she was smiling because he was now her prey. He might not know it yet, but the roles had reversed, and now it was his turn to get clapped. Sensing the shift in the air, Kaguya frowned beneath his mask. With an uncomfortable sigh, he realized Andrea wasn't just some random Kimyo. She was a legend. Matter of fact, she wasn't just a legend, but one of the best. Because Andrea, apart from being a certified muscle mommy and glorified eye candy, was ranked 147th on the strongest Kimyo list. Meaning she was her. And those abs weren't just for show. When this revelation dropped, not just the enemy, but the gang was shocked as well. They'd never imagined that the Nubian princess and certified baddie Andrea was that formidable. Of course, they knew she packed weapons of mass destruction, but that was in reference to the cheeks and cakes. It had nothing to do with combat prowess. In any case, the truth was out now, leading to an awkward silence among those present. Deeming it a good time to flex, Andrea unsealed her red bag, revealing what lay beneath. A mysterious subspace-like object astutely named Pandora's chest. As you might have guessed, this was a talent object. Its defining feature was an endless interior capable of storing virtually anything. However, it had one major limitation. Only the contracted user could access or summon the items stored inside. Being far more experienced in the Kimyo world, Kaguya recognized the chest instantly. He'd heard rumors of the talent object before, but he never imagined that its current contractor was Andrea Thomas, nor that she'd be here right now actively dismantling his plans. Nevertheless, he shelved his curiosity about the chest, and more importantly, how it had ended up in Andrea's hands. He locked in. After all, he still had a fight to win. Meanwhile, the still green boys were struggling to process the shock. On one hand, they were stunned that their sensei was such a powerful fighter. On the other, she owned a talent object that most people would literally die to get their hands on. The day was becoming increasingly unpredictable. While the two were still gawking at the growing list of surprises, Andrea stretched out her arm to activate the chest. This immediately snapped them back to reality, especially Tevin, who stared at her like she'd lost her damn mind. Wasn't it common knowledge that Pandora's chest should never be opened? Then what the hell was she doing? Hadn't she learned that lesson from the Big Papi himself, Kratos? Ignoring Tevin's silent panic, Andrea flexed her rock-hard abs and summoned a weapon from Pandora's chest, Sengo Muramasa. The katana answered her call, flying out of the chest and landing firmly in her hand. It was also at this moment that Andrea's true Kimyo talent was revealed: weapon mastery. As the name suggests, she possesses the ability to instantly master any weapon she comes into contact with, along with every technique associated with it. This was her personal Kimyo talent, and shouldn't be confused with weapon talents. As previously explained, weapons in this world can also possess Kimyo talents of their own. Even so, obtaining a weapon talent that perfectly complements your own Kimyo talent is exceedingly rare, something Kaguya was clearly aware of, judging by his growing wariness. With Pandora's chest at her disposal, Andrea effectively wielded an endless arsenal, making her a truly terrifying opponent. Worse still, some of the weapons stored inside were destined to be talent weapons themselves, amplifying her threat even further. Take Muramasa, for example. When the blade landed in her grip, her body underwent a strange transformation, donning armor that perfectly matched the weapon's aesthetic. It became clear that with every weapon she summoned, especially talent weapons, her form would subtly shift to synergize with it. Whether this was for enhanced combat efficiency, or simply an artistic choice to make Andrea more MILF-coded, is up for debate. Personally, I'm not complaining, so we'll leave it at that. Done with her summoning, Andrea turned her gaze toward Grimdora, eyes sharp, predatory, sizing up her prey. Uncomfortable under her stare, Grimdora barked at her to stop immediately. Her gaze was unacceptable. Andrea responded with a simple, calm mutter. Calm down. Contrary to Grimdora's belief, she wasn't speaking to him. She was speaking to the sword, attempting to soothe Muramasa's raging bloodlust. When her words failed, Andrea had no choice but to draw the blade and let it taste blood. Perfect timing, too. Grimdora launched his first attack, his chain whip lashing out. With a swift and graceful draw, Andrea met it head-on, slicing through the whip like butter. She even struck a pose afterward, one that may or may not have had me gawking at the panel for hours, because goddamn, just look at those thighs. She could probably strangle a bear to death with those things. Anyway, thirst trap aside, Andrea immediately closed the distance, pressing forward for a follow-up attack. Sensing the danger, Grimdora fired missiles at her in response. Unfazed, Andrea sheathed her blade, then redrew it in a smooth arc, slicing clean through the incoming explosives. She pressed the assault, engaging Grimdora in brutal melee. With a casual swing, she severed his arm clean off. A quick twist redirected the blade, slashing through his gut. Before Grimdora could recover, Andrea shifted into a two-handed grip and carved a wide, vicious wound across his chest. The giant staggered, retaliating with a savage punch, but Andrea effortlessly dodged it. From her elevated position, she lunged forward and stabbed Muramasa deep into Grimdora's chest. Unfortunately, his half-cyborg body meant even that wasn't fatal. Realizing this, Andrea quickly withdrew, creating distance. Grimdora laughed, boasting about his near immortality. Attacks like that wouldn't work, he claimed. If she wanted to bring him down, she'd need to do far better. And it wasn't like he'd just stand there and let her try. He'd kill her for real. She was destined to get clapped. Pause. Hearing this, Andrea broke into a wide smile and summoned yet another weapon. This one shot from Pandora's chest, titties and all, and landed firmly in her hand. The talent weapon Elliot the Traceless. Her body transformed again, taking on a far more flamboyant appearance. I don't know about you, but our boy Elliot is proving to be a zesty fellow, because what the hell is up with those feathers? Could he be the drag queen equivalent of magic daggers? That said, the form does go kinda hard, so I'll let him slide this one time. Seeing Andrea's new form, Grimdora doubled his assault, whipping wildly with reckless abandon. Andrea responded with the classic, "Watch this no jutsu," disappearing before his eyes. When she reappeared, she was already on him, shredding his thighs without mercy. The damage was severe, forcing Grimdora to collapse to his knees, his legs a bloody mess. But Andrea wasn't finished. Ignoring his desperate breath attack, she plunged the dagger deep into his neck. The sickening thud echoed across the battlefield. Still not done, Andrea used Grimdora's head as a springboard, launching herself into the air while summoning yet another weapon. This time, she wanted something heavy. She was done fucking around. Responding to her call, Pandora's titties launched its contents skyward, revealing not one, but two weapons. The legendary dual axes Asgear. And while we're here, can we talk about how muscle mommy Andrea looks right now? If her abs were that solid, why even bother with weapons? She could have just grated Grimdora to death with those thick mommy abs alone. Jokes aside, Andrea stayed focused and delivered her finisher. She brought the axes down, cleaving through Grimdora's neck in a violent explosion of force, kicking up a massive dust storm. When it settled, all that remained was a devastated training ground, and a visibly impressed Kaguya, applauding sincerely. Andrea, however, wasn't finished. She retrieved her weapons, triple-wielded them like she was the homie Zoro, and turned to face Kaguya. Unfazed, he maintained his relaxed demeanor, advising her not to be hasty. Instead of rushing into battle, she should at least hear him out. If she was lucky, he might even explain why he was there. Before he could finish, a flaming javelin shot toward his head, forcing him to duck. Enraged, Kaguya watched the destruction in silence, fury simmering beneath his mask. Didn't the attacker know basic etiquette? Who launches a sneak attack without even saying hello? And worse, why shout the technique's name while doing it? What did they think this was? A shonen? Were they planning to win with the power of friendship and love? Nah, fuck that. This was the real deal. And they were all his prey. It was about time he taught them the true essence of manners maketh man and all that Kingsman bullshit. They could come at him, one at a time or all together. He was down for whatever. The boys said bet and charged in, moving strategically to trap Kaguya in a pincer attack. Meanwhile, over at Tevin's side, the fatal danger to the kids had finally passed. He handed them over to their moms, telling them to leave the area as fast as possible. Then, with resolve but clear helplessness, He turned toward the ongoing fight. A fight he very much wanted to take part in, but knew he couldn't. Using lion hide had drained his stamina, leaving nothing in the tank to effectively contribute to the fade. As for Che and Anton, they lunged in like hungry wolves, unleashing a myriad of martial techniques on Kaguya. Anton went first with a downward swing, followed by a flurry of strikes aimed at Kaguya's face. But the villain was faster, nimbly weaving through the attacks with minimal movement. Eventually, Anton grew frustrated and swung wide, hoping to land a hit using the half-moon technique. Regrettably, the villain was indeed mighty, leaping over the attack and landing atop Anton's staff like the whole confrontation was some sick joke. Before he could bury Anton with the aura he was farming, an attack flew in from the side, forcing him to backpedal. The attack was clearly Che's. Seeing his brother get humiliated, he decided to step in. Nevertheless, his intervention was still child's play to Kaguya, who laughed at the duo, still not taking the fight seriously. He even found time to engage in friendly banter, telling Che that he had the same look on his face that his father once had, implying he knew more about Che's origins than he let on. Ignoring this, Che created an opening for Anton to attack, and the latter didn't waste it. He called forth a flurry of endless staffs, yeeting them toward the frustrating Kaguya. But once again, the villain made easy work of them, weaving through the attacks with the playful agility of a monkey. None of the staffs came close to touching him. Seeing this, Anton followed up with a sneak attack, aiming for a headshot at the spot Kaguya's head was bound to land. Unfortunately, Kaguya read the move as well, tilting his head to dodge the seemingly unavoidable strike, further proving how outmatched the duo was. Little did he know, Anton's attack was merely the first part of a two-pronged assault. Che was already upon him, fists bathed in flames and ready for the follow-up. He blasted through the wall, demolishing everything in his path, hoping to land a hit on Kaguya as well. But once again, the villain proved too slippery, escaping Che's all-out attack. He reappeared a few meters away, throwing shade at Anton and Che, telling them to stop with the violence and just talk it out. Since they were so trash that landing a direct hit on him was troublesome, why not try a different approach and use their words instead? Surely a battle of tongues would fare better than the disastrous display they were putting on. Che gritted his teeth and continued attacking, showering Kaguya with a flurry of punches, all of which were effortlessly dodged. Unperturbed, Che pressed on, unleashing a 1-2 combo as he questioned Kaguya. Was he responsible for Ferrari's death? Was he the mastermind behind the tragic demise of such a fine maiden? Feigning shock, Kaguya nimbly avoided Che's strikes as he exclaimed in mock confusion. Was Ferrari dead? Who could be responsible for such madness? This enraged Che, who signaled for Anton to move. It was time to end this shit. Anton said bet and rushed in, hands pressed together to summon his next staff. With the weapon in tow, he charged forward, joining Che and trapping Kaguya in another pincer attack. Che managed to corner Kaguya at the edge of the roof, causing him to slip up and leave himself vulnerable. The boys didn't miss the chance and lunged in, unleashing their mightiest techniques. The air itself trembled from the force, followed by a devastating explosion that tore the roof apart. But when the dust settled, instead of victorious grins, only shock filled their faces. They'd missed. Not only had they missed, Kaguya had baited them into attacking each other, with the duo tanking the hits meant for him. It was a bizarre and humiliating outcome. Incredulous, the boys stared toward Kaguya's new position, wondering if their suspicions were correct. Did this bastard just teleport, or were they tripping? Kaguya confirmed it. He had indeed teleported. Matter of fact, with their trash skills, the duo had no hope of reaching him, let alone touching him, unless he allowed it. So wouldn't it be better to just talk things out? He had a lot to tell them, and wasting time on this pointless battle was, well, pointless. As the trio spoke, Azam arrived, supporting an exhausted Tevin. The homie looked like shit, making me wonder why he'd even come over when it was obvious he'd only be a liability. But that aside, the squad was finally assembled, ready to face the big bad villain Kaguya. Kaguya flicked them a single glance before shifting his focus to the sky. Someone else had decided to join the party, and he found them far more interesting than the small fry on the ground. Who else could it be but Mommy Andrea? She shot in like a rocket, obliterating the roof, the building, and everything else upon landing. As the dust settled, her sultry voice rang out, informing the boys that their enemy wasn't as simple as they thought. He was Kagaya the Shepherd, one of CHADY's most wanted threats, and a Kimyo who had ranked 102nd on the strongest Kimyo list before mysteriously disappearing. CHADY, the Kimyo Organized Defense Enterprise, was a council-led organization responsible for the protection, regulation, and placement of the Kimyo race. They handled everything Kimyo-related. Upon learning Kagaya's identity, CHADY's expression shifted drastically. This was no longer a mission to apprehend a villain. It was a fight for survival. Kagaya, however, took it all in stride, unbothered by his identity being revealed. On the contrary, he struck up a conversation with Andrea, telling her it was a pleasure to finally meet her. The others weren't nearly as calm. They hurled accusations at Kagaya, demanding to know why he'd gone so far. Why order his lackeys to attack the city, sow chaos, and murder Kimyos? Because of him, innocent lives had been lost. And for what? Worse still, his shameless underlings had targeted children. What kind of maniac did that? They shouted at him, demanding answers, threatening that if he didn't explain himself, there was no way he was leaving alive. Kagaya told them to hold up. He'd explain, if they'd just give him the chance. He tried repeatedly to get a word in, but the squad was too deep in their rant to listen. Eventually, his anger overflowed. His aura shifted to a demonic crimson. Fine. If they didn't want to listen, he'd just have to make them. He bellowed, telling them to shut the fuck up. A massive wave of aura followed, crushing down on everyone and cracking the surrounding buildings. The entire area plunged into chaos. The squad left reeling at the sheer absurdity of Kagaya's power. Even staying conscious under his presence was difficult. Finally, the pressure eased enough for them to see what was happening, and what they saw shocked them. Kagaya had changed. A ponytail slithered behind him like a venomous snake. His demeanor was entirely different, more domineering, more demonic. The mask on his face had shifted from playful green to a sinister demonic visage, and his clothes had transformed into a red martial arts robe, symbolizing the carnage he was about to unleash. Fuming, he congratulated the gang for their persistence. Despite his restraint, they had truly and utterly enraged him. Witnessing the change in Kagaya, Andrea took it upon herself to explain, or rather, drop some lore about, the big bad villain before them. She shared that Kagaya the Shepherd, as she'd mentioned before, was a strong Kimyo ranked 102nd on the strongest Kimyo list. But that was not where his legend ended. Through some mysterious means, he managed to unlock an upgrade to his Kimyo talent, further enhancing his already formidable prowess. This upgrade, however, which came in the form of a new mask, was so dark and dangerous that it was deemed illegal the moment it was revealed, and Kagaya was sentenced to imprisonment in Patmos to prevent the power from harming innocent civilians. As for what Patmos is, it is a hidden island used for the imprisonment of Kimyos, whose talents are considered too dangerous to be among the general public. It is unknown whether simply possessing dangerous powers grants you direct imprisonment in Patmos, or if you actually have to use those powers for evil to be imprisoned. Either way, the island is like a fantasy-side Guantanamo Bay, so of course no one would want to willingly go there. The same was true for Kagaya when he caught wind of his sentencing. He became like some of your fathers and decided to check out early, leaving to buy some milk only to disappear without a trace. Before the authorities could come around to arrest him for his talent, he was already long gone, managing to stay hidden and evade detection until now. Speaking to this point, Andrea involuntarily frowned as she drew attention to the smile on Kagaya's face. She told the boys not to be deceived by that jubilant smile. There was a lot of malice and killing intent hidden behind it. In fact, if she was being honest, she doubted the few of them could stand a chance against Kagaya in his current form. If things went haywire, there was a significant chance they would all die there. Taking a deep breath to regain her calm, she further explained the details of Kagaya's talent, which, as expected, was related to the masks on his face. Each mask coincided with an emotion and, consequently, a different degree of boost to his power. Negative emotions provided a greater boost, hence, the Kagaya before them, who was exuding intense rage, wasn't an enemy they could contend with. And I know what you're thinking. If his power depended on his emotions, then wouldn't that be a liability? Say, for example, he needed greater martial power than his current emotion provided. Wouldn't he find himself in a pickle? Andrea seemed to expect this question, so she went ahead and explained. Normally, that would have been the case, but Kaguya was an anomaly who had mastered his emotions. At any time and at any point, he could freely change his emotions, consequently gaining the martial strength he needed. Thus, it was accurate to say that no matter what or when, Kaguya was always at his strongest. Hearing the attention directed at him, Kaguya decided to speak up for the first time. He spread his hands wide in triumph and told the squad to listen to his next words carefully. He was currently seething with rage, freed from the shackles of moderation and rationality. So for their sake, he advised them to please shut the fuck up. It would be a pity if they ticked him off and he ended up massacring them before he even passed on his message. Speaking of his message, he'd heard all their accusations and questions, and to a point, they were indeed right. He and his master had been the ones behind the recent cyborg appearances and their massacres, but that was just a small fraction of their greater plan. To put it simply, they had the same ambition as Thanos, and that was to restore balance to the world. As for how they would do that, the mad tyrant said it best: kill everyone and everything that offset that balance, meaning purging the world and waging a nuclear war against humanity. Shocked, Andrea told him to back the fuck up. What was this bullshit about purging the world? Did he really think everyone would just stand by and let him do as he pleased? Kaguya replied that their chances weren't as abysmal as she thought. Once like-minded individuals learned of their purpose, they'd have more support than she imagined. Heck, after hearing him out, she might even turn out to be one of their supporters. He went on to explain that their plan was to restore true order to the world. Currently, humans stood at the top of the food chain, but that wasn't the natural order of things. Sure, in the past, and without Kimyos, that was the case, but that stopped being true the moment Kimyos were born. From the second the greater existences that were Kimyos entered the world, its fundamental hierarchy changed for good. Kimyos became the apex of the world, led by the first 4 Kimyos to ever exist, the Great Four. But due to negligence, the erosion of time, and the intermingling of Kimyos with lesser humans, the powerful bloodline of the Kimyos was slowly polluted, leading to the current situation where Kimyos had fallen from grace, becoming weaker and weaker through the generations, and eventually giving lesser humans a chance to rise up and enslave them. Because what else could you call abiding by the rules of clearly inferior humans, if not slavery? However, that would soon cease to be the case. The world would be purged, inferior Kimyos eradicated, and the strong ones would take their rightful place at the top of the hierarchy once again. Through this process, the formidable bloodline of the Kimyos would be restored, and balance would finally be re-established. Listening to his cult-like preaching, the squad couldn't help but look at him strangely. Tevin brought up the fact that he spoke about greater and lesser Kimyos, yet his side killed all Kimyos indiscriminately, alluding to the murder of Farah, clearly a stronger Kimyo. Besides, wasn't it common knowledge for the strong to stand up for the weak? Uncle Ben said so himself. With great power comes great responsibility and all that shit. Kaguya almost died laughing at his rebuttal. With great strength comes great what? He could miss him with that nonsense. He taunted the squad, telling them they lacked vision. He let them know that his master and their supporters were already on the second phase of their plans. As for the first phase, it was to amass an army, nuclear weapons, and a legion of loyal troops to their cause, a phase that was already fulfilled. The second phase was even simpler. Kill anyone and everyone who posed a threat to their plan. That meant any Kimyo who stood with humans to oppress other Kimyos. If they weren't for them, then they were against them and had to be purged immediately. And funny enough, the 6 of them had made it onto that list of Kimyos to be purged. Alarmed, Che entered a fighting stance. With his aura exuding defiance, he told Kaguya they didn't fear the smoke. If they wanted to silence them, then they'd better kill them all. Otherwise, they would always stand in their way. Hearing this, Kaguya changed his approach. He told Che it wasn't necessary for them to be enemies. Had he ever wondered why he was allowed to walk freely, despite having a dangerous talent? The answer was his master, Leo Thomas. Normally, people like him and his master would be deemed criminals with illegal talents just like Kaguya. But because Leo Thomas was a war hero fighting for humanity, he managed to buy his freedom. Without such feats, they would have been sent to Patmos without hesitation. So he should ask himself, Was he really going to fight for people who would do that to him and his beloved master? Seeing Che slowly getting swayed, Andrea told him to get it together. She reminded him that Leo was a hero with a good heart and had always supported the existence of Patmos. The prison needed to exist to confine dangerous criminals like Kaguya, who would only harm innocents if left unchecked. Enraged that his brainwashing had been interrupted, Kaguya warned Andrea to shut the fuck up. If she interrupted him again, he wouldn't mind going against his master's orders and slaughtering them all where they stood. In fact, the only reason they were still alive was because his master had bigger plans for them. If not, he would have killed them long ago. With that, he glared at Andrea one last time before informing the squad that he was done talking. Everything he had to say had already been said. Saying so, he poofed like a magic trick, reverting back to his green and happy visage from before. Poking fun at the gang's serious and pale complexions, he told them to lighten up before bidding his farewells. If things went according to plan, they would definitely meet again. Then he disappeared, vanishing as swiftly as he'd appeared. Left puzzled by the recent events, the squad stayed back to discuss them. Though ridiculous and outrageous, they wondered why Kaguya had basically told them his entire plan. Could it be a trap? Or maybe a misdirection to catch them off guard? Tevin replied that he doubted it was either of the two. He was more inclined to believe that Kaguya had been completely honest with them. He'd told them the truth because he believed there was nothing the squad could do about it. Whether they knew the truth or not, it wouldn't make much of a difference. Mulling over Tevin's words, Che noticed something that made his eyes go wide. It was Lewis, carrying the corpse of his deceased uncle Elon, who had regrettably fallen during the battle. We switched to later that night at the Red House, the Parliament building of Trinidad. Inside the building, we are introduced to the 10 elected officials who collectively run the government. Due to the dire state of the country, the 10 officials had gathered to convene a meeting, obviously to discuss a resolution to the current chaos. They were Minister Amare Green, the homie with enough waves to drown a city. Damn, that cut is clean. Minister Dante Smith, a pimp-looking motherfucker who looks like he slays vampires on the side. Sonia Olsen, a rich-looking second generation who seems to be fantasizing about her next crack. Those lips, though. Gary Choi, an active Yakuza for sure, with a smiling hairline. Richard Devertoy. I won't say much about him except that he needs to be locked up immediately. I don't know for what, but this bastard is definitely on some pervy list and needs to be locked the fuck up. Barbara Devertoy, kin to Richard, and also giving off mean stepmother vibes. Rajani Bharat, no words are needed, only that she can get it any time, on God. Minister Joseph Gardner, and finally Lisa Baylor, the Silver Cougar. Chairing the meeting was Green, who gave a rundown of the recent events in the country and emphasized the need for the council to get involved. If the incidents with the cyborg assassins weren't handled properly, then the citizens might start questioning why they'd elected them in the first place. Luckily, they already had a foolproof plan to resolve the chaos. He just needed to run it by them. By the end of that meeting, with their consent and the head chancellor's, tranquility would once again be guaranteed in Trinidad. Looking back at the Aura farming head chancellor, Abel Legasov, Green asked for permission to commence the briefing. 2 days later, at the Hemlock Mansion, a funeral was underway. Several friends and family members had gathered to pay their respects to the late Elon and the Hemlock family. One of them was Andrea, now dressed in black mourning clothes, offering her condolences to Elon's widow. Though heartbroken, the widow managed to keep it together and accept the sentiments, replying that Elon had deemed it an honor to have them around. According to him, all friends of Louis were equally his own children. Andrea heard this, and her face showed a look of sadness and regret. If only she'd been strong enough to prevent such a tragedy. Shifting her gaze, she acknowledged Elon's son, Elon Jr., before stepping up to officiate the burial. She first thanked everyone for coming, then spoke of the deceased, sharing his legacy. To wrap up the ceremony, she welcomed the new head of the Hemlock family to perform the last rites, as practiced in their family traditions. Amid soft murmurs and a solemn atmosphere, Lewis made his entrance. He was now the new head of the Hemlock family, and for some reason, maybe to Aura Farm, he decided to attend the funeral dressed like that. But I understand, those gym gains have to be shown off no matter what. Stepping up to his late uncle, Lewis said a couple of words to honor him, He spoke of how Elon had taken him in after his mother's passing and raised him as his own. To Lewis, Elon was not only a hero, but a true father. Then, as the new family head, he welcomed his uncle to the new battlefield. Hemlock men were never allowed to stop fighting, even in death. After their passing, they still had to continue serving the family by fighting alongside the living. If that doesn't make sense, wait a few minutes. It'll all be clarified. Turning to the crying Elon Jr., Lewis told him to toughen up. With his father's passing and Lewis's ascension as the new family head, he was now in line to inherit the family's talent. Inheriting the talent naturally meant he would have to uphold the responsibilities of leading the family as its future head. Thus, a strong will and resolve were necessary. He told him to watch carefully, as he would now demonstrate the responsibility and burden of wielding the family's talent. Saying so, he took off his robe, grabbed a torch, and turned to Che for help. Normally, this part of the ceremony was carried out by Leo, but with his death and Che inheriting his power, he was the perfect substitute to pick up the mantle. Che considered it for a while before complying, using his Ilios flames to light the torch. With the blazing flames, Louis proceeded to give his uncle a medieval send-off, but that was just the beginning. Once the hero had been reduced to ashes in the fire, he finally activated his talent, Ash of the Fathers. It was also at this time that we learned what he meant by Hemlock men never stopping the fight, even in death. With his talent activated, he called forth the hidden and secret technique of the family, Ash Retrieval. Clouds of ash and soul drifted from the flames, coalescing mid-air to form Elon's visage before being sucked into the ritual tattoo on Lewis's back. Turns out the ashes that made up the Hemlock family talent were literally the ashes of their fathers, the remains of past generations who had fallen and continued to serve the family even in death. With that revelation, the onlookers watched solemnly as Louis performed the final ritual, sending his uncle to join their ancestors. With tears streaming down his face, he thanked them for their service and sacrifice. Because of them, the Hemlocks and their family talent could live on. I know about there's no rest for the wicked, but damn, ain't this a bitch.